4 years ago, the most powerful being in the galaxy died screaming, and nobody knew what to do with the silence he left behind. Not the rebellion, not the New Republic, not even the Jedi. Because silence, real silence, the kind that follows something that enormous, is not the same as safety. And everyone who was paying attention knew it. The Emperor was dead. His apprentice was dead. The Empire was breaking apart, like a ship with no pilot, still moving, still dangerous, but no longer going anywhere deliberate. 4 years had passed, and in those 4 years, something strange had happened. Something nobody had put into words yet. The galaxy had started to relax. That is the thing that should worry you. Because the Sith had been declared finished before. Not once, not twice. At least 4 times in recorded galactic history, someone stood in the wreckage of a Sith defeat and said the same thing. It's over. They're gone. We're safe. And every single time, they were wrong. So when you hear that the Emperor is dead, and the Sith are finished, and the darkness has finally been driven out of the galaxy, hold that thought carefully. Hold it the way you hold something very old that you are not sure is still intact. Because what we are about to walk through together is not a victory story. It is something older than that. Something heavier. 25,000 years of a civilization that refused to stay dead. That kept coming back, in different shapes, under different names, with the same reaching, burning need at the center of it. And the question, the one that nobody in the New Republic is asking yet, the one that the Jedi archives don't have a clean answer to, is whether this time is actually different, or whether the silence is just another version of what came before. The tombs are still there. That is the first thing to understand. 4 years after the Emperor died above Endor, 4 years after the second Death Star broke apart in the upper atmosphere of a forest moon, the tombs on Korriban are still there. Nobody burned them. Nobody sealed them. Nobody decided what to do with them. They are simply there, the way they have always been there, cut into red stone on a world that smells like dust and old iron. The valley that holds them is called the Valley of the Dark Lords. It has been called that for so long that nobody remembers what the valley was called before. Maybe it had no name before. Maybe the darkness named it, and everything else came after. It is Divatanast, ABY. The Emperor has been dead for 4 years. His apprentice has been dead for 4 years. The empire they built together is not dead, not exactly, but it is fragmenting, breaking into pieces. Some of those pieces are fighting each other. Some are negotiating. Some are simply waiting to see what the New Republic becomes before deciding which way to fall. The galaxy is in the strange space between one thing ending and another thing beginning. And in that space, in that specific and uncomfortable quiet, it is worth asking a question that nobody has quite managed to ask yet. What just ended? Not the war. The war is still going. In pieces, in skirmishes, in border systems that have not fully decided which side they belong to. Not the Empire. The Empire is wounded and scattered, but its officers are still out there. Its star destroyers are still in service. What ended, or what ended most completely, most finally, was something older than the war, older than the Empire, something that had been present in the galaxy for so long that people had stopped seeing it as a separate thing. The Sith are gone. 2 of them. There were only ever 2 of them at the end. That is one of the facts about the Sith that sounds impossible when you first hear it. The civilization that burned stars and shattered Jedi orders and bent the course of galactic history down to a single point. Reduced, deliberately, to two people, a master, an apprentice, and then, above Endor, both of them were gone within the same hour. The galaxy exhaled, but the tombs are still there. This is an archaeology, not a victory speech. We are not here to celebrate the end of the Sith. We are here because something that lasted 25,000 years, something that died and came back and died again and came back again, across more centuries than most civilizations managed to exist, deserves more than a footnote in a war's final chapter. We are here because the dust has settled enough that we can begin to look at the shape of what was left. And the shape is strange. Strange enough that it is worth sitting with for a while. Strange enough that the more carefully you look at it, the less certain you become about what you are seeing. Start with what is easy to say. The Sith existed. They existed for a very long time. They called themselves the inevitable. They called themselves the correction. They called themselves the truth that the Jedi refused to look at. These are their words, recorded in their own histories, carved into their own stone. We have those records. Some of them, the ones that survived. Now start with what is harder to say. The Sith were defeated completely, thoroughly, with absolute finality at least 4 times before the Battle of Endor. The Great Hyperspace War, defeated. The Jedi Civil War's aftermath, scattered. The New Sith Wars, broken. The 7th Battle of Ruusan, officially extinct. Each time, the Republic and the Jedi declared the darkness finished. Each time, the histories were updated. The threat was past. The galaxy was safe. Each time, they were wrong. So when we say the Sith are gone now in 19 ABY, 4 years after Endor, we are saying something that has been said before. We are saying it in the same galaxy where it was said before, standing on the same stones where it was carved into history before. This does not mean we are wrong this time. It means we should hold the statement a little more carefully than it is usually held. It means we should not confuse silence with ending. Korriban, stand in the Valley of the Dark Lords on any day in 19 ABY, and the first thing you notice is the quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Not the quiet of a place that has healed. The quiet of a place that is still. There is a difference. A healed place feels lighter than it used to. A still place feels exactly as heavy as it has always felt, and the weight has nowhere to go. The valley is that second kind of quiet. The tombs face each other across a width of red stone. Their entrances are carved with figures and script that took centuries to learn to read. Each tomb belongs to a Dark Lord, some famous, some whose names historians only recovered partially, some whose names were deliberately destroyed by the Sith themselves, which is a strange thing to think about. The Sith destroyed each other's names sometimes. They were not unified. They were not a single continuous mind moving through history. They were a civilization, which means they were also fractured and feuding, and sometimes more interested in what the Sith next to them was doing than in what the Republic across the galaxy was doing. This is one of the things the myth of the Sith tends to forget. The myth of the Sith is clean. Darkness versus light. Evil versus good. A clear line between what the Sith represented and what the Jedi represented. The actual history is less clean. The actual history has Sith who questioned the dark side, Sith who defected, Sith who were trained as Jedi and chose differently, Jedi who were trained as Jedi and also chose differently. The line between the two things was always thinner than the myth required it to be. We will come back to this several times. Because the gap between the myth of the Sith and the actual Sith matters enormously for understanding what they were, and what it means that they are, at least for now, gone. The first question this archaeology is going to ask is not where the Sith came from. We know where they came from. We have records. The first question is something different, something the records don't answer. Something that the records, if you read them carefully and across enough centuries, actually seem to circle around without ever addressing directly. The question is this: what were the Sith trying to become? Not conquer. Conquer was always the method, not the goal. Not destroy the Jedi. Destroying the Jedi was always a step towards something, not the destination. Every Sith account that survives, every philosophy carved into tomb walls, every teaching preserved in holocrons, every dark side text recovered from ruined academies, every one of them is pointing at something. Something they believed was waiting at the end of their path. Something they called, in different eras and different languages, different names: perfection, completion, truth, power beyond death. They were always reaching toward something, and they never got there. That might be the most important thing to understand about the Sith before this archaeology goes any further. 25,000 years, 12 or more significant civilizations and empires and orders, each one calling itself the true version. Countless individual Sith Lords, each one believing they were the one who would finally reach the thing their predecessors could not reach. And none of them got there. Every single one of them fell short. Every single one of them died, or was defeated, or destroyed themselves trying. This is not the story the Sith told about themselves, but it is the story the evidence tells. The dust in the Valley of the Dark Lords has not been disturbed in a long time. There is a specific quality to undisturbed dust in a place that was once full of life. It is not the same as dust in a place that was never inhabited. Inhabited dust is different. It carries the impression of things that were there. The stone in the valley carries something like this. Not memory. Stone does not have memory, or at least not the kind that translates into language. But weight. The weight of everything that happened here over millennia. The weight of battles. The weight of rituals. The weight of dark side energy poured into the rock by Force practitioners who believed that power could be stored this way. That they could make the planet itself into a weapon. They were not entirely wrong. The stone on Korriban holds something. Everyone who visits the valley feels it. None of them agree on exactly what it is. An expedition in 17 ABY sent a team of New Republic researchers to Korriban to catalog what was left. Their reports are careful documents, scientific, measured. Each researcher was required to submit a personal account alongside the official report. The official reports describe what you would expect: architectural documentation, artifact inventory, structural surveys of the tombs. The personal accounts are different. 3 of the 7 researchers independently used the same word to describe what the valley felt like: attentive. They did not know the others had used this word. The reports were submitted separately and compared afterward. 3 researchers. No contact with each other during the survey. All describing the valley as attentive, as if it were paying attention to them, as if something inside the stone was waiting to see what they would do. The expedition lead noted this in her summary, and then did not know what to do with it. Neither do we. The Sith Empire, whichever version you are referring to, and there are several, is over. The Emperor is dead. The rule of two has no one left to follow it. There are no Sith Lords in the galaxy as of 19 ABY. None that we know of. None that have declared themselves. And yet, the tombs are still there. The stone is still attentive. The dark side did not leave Korriban when the Emperor died. It stayed. It is still there, sitting in the rock, waiting. For what? That is not a question with a clean answer. But it is one of the questions this archaeology is going to sit with. We are going to move through time. Not cleanly, not in order. Memory does not work in order. And this is an act of memory as much as it is an act of history. We are going to move through the oldest records, the fragments from before anyone was keeping proper track. We are going to move through the middle periods when the Sith were vast and their names were spoken with a specific kind of fear. We are going to move through the long silence after Ruusan, the 1,000 years, when the Sith officially did not exist and were quietly doing the most important work they ever did. And we are going to move through the end, which was not, as we have established, entirely an ending. Just a shape, a particular shape, the shape of a silence that is still holding something inside it. At the entrance to the Valley of the Dark Lords, on the wall to the right as you walk in, there is a carving. It is old, older than most of the tombs. The translation was finished in 12 ABY by an archivist who spent 4 years on it. The carving says, roughly, "What is buried here does not sleep." Nobody knows who carved it. Nobody knows which era it came from. The archivist noted that the Sith word used for sleep is the same word they used for surrender. What is buried here does not surrender. She filed this note in the archive and went home. She has not returned to Korriban since. The wind comes through the valley entrance at evening. It moves the dust that has not moved in years, just slightly. Just enough to remind you that the dust is there. The dust settles again. The valley goes quiet, but not peaceful. Never quite peaceful. Here is the first problem. The oldest records we have about the Sith were written by the Sith. Think about what that means. The people who left the earliest accounts of who the Sith were, what they wanted, why they fought, were the same people who had every reason to shape that story, to make themselves larger, to make their enemies smaller, to make their own pain sound like destiny. This is not unique to the Sith. Every civilization writes its own history with a particular angle. But with the Sith, the angle was sharper than most, because the Sith did not just record their history. They weaponized it. They used their past as proof that their future was inevitable. And when you read those records now carefully, slowly, checking one account against another, you start to notice the cracks. The places where two sources say opposite things. The places where something important is described in enormous detail by one writer and not mentioned at all by another. The places where the story is almost too clean, almost too shaped, almost too much like what someone would write if they were trying to convince themselves of something. We are going to start at the beginning, as close to the beginning as the records allow. And the beginning is complicated. The Sith did not start as the Sith. That is the first thing the oldest records tell us, if you read them without the myth in the way. What became the Sith Order started as something else entirely. It started as a fracture. Approximately 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, though the exact date shifts, depending on which archive you consult, a group of Jedi were expelled from the Jedi Order. Not a small group, a significant one. These were not weak force users. These were not failed students who couldn't keep up. Many of them were powerful. Some of them were gifted in ways the Order had rarely seen. What got them expelled was not lack of ability. It was disagreement. They believed the Jedi Code was wrong. Or not wrong, exactly. Incomplete. They believed the Force had more to offer than the Jedi Council was willing to explore. They believed that emotion, anger, passion, desire was not something to be cut away. It was something to be used. The Council disagreed strongly. And so these Jedi, these dark Jedi, as history would come to call them, left. Or were forced to leave, depending on which account you read. Here is the first contradiction in the record. The Jedi archives say they were expelled. The accounts written by the Dark Jedi themselves say they chose to go. Both accounts exist. Both were written by people who were there. Neither one agrees with the other. We do not resolve this. We simply note it, and we move on. The Dark Jedi exiles traveled. They found a world. The world was Korriban, and Korriban was not empty. There was already a species living there, a species called the Sith. Not a metaphor, not a title, an actual people, red-skinned, proud, deeply connected to something in the Force that was darker and stranger than anything the exiled Jedi had encountered in their years inside the Order. The native Sith had been living on Korriban and the surrounding worlds for thousands of years before the Dark Jedi arrived. They had their own culture, their own rituals, their own relationship with power and with the dark side, though they would not have used that phrase. They simply called it the Force. Their version of it, the only version they had ever known. When the Dark Jedi arrived on Korriban, something happened that the records describe but cannot fully explain. The two groups recognized each other, not as enemies, not as allies, as something without a clean name. The exiled Jedi looked at the native Sith and saw people who lived inside the thing the Jedi Order had told them was forbidden. The native Sith looked at the exiled Jedi and saw people who carried more raw Force potential than anyone they had ever encountered. Both groups were drawn toward the other. Both groups were also afraid of the other. The records from both sides, yes, both sides left records. Though the native Sith records are fragmentary and difficult to translate, describe this first meeting with the same word: recognition. They recognized something in each other. Neither side recorded what, exactly. Maybe they could not say. Maybe the thing they recognized did not have a word yet. What happened next took generations. The Dark Jedi did not conquer the native Sith quickly. They did not need to. They were seen as gods, or close enough to gods that the distinction did not matter in practice. Their Force abilities were so far beyond what the native Sith had seen that the native population incorporated them into existing structures of power and religion almost immediately. The Dark Jedi became lords. The native Sith became their subjects and their teachers. Because the native Sith knew things about the dark side of the Force that the exiled Jedi had never encountered, things the Jedi Order had never studied, things that would eventually become the foundation of everything the Sith Order built. The exchange went both ways. This is something the myth forgets. The myth says the Dark Jedi corrupted the native Sith. The actual record suggests something more like a merger. Two groups with complementary damage, finding each other in the dark. The civilization that grew from this meeting called itself the Sith Empire. It took the name of the native species. It took the Force knowledge of the exiled Jedi. It mixed them together into something that had not existed before. And for a long time, a very long time, it believed it was building towards something. Something that would justify all of it. The wars, the suffering, the endless, grinding accumulation of power. Something at the end of the path that would make the path worth walking. The records never say clearly what that something was. This is not an accident. Here is what the records do say. Every major Sith leader in the early Empire wrote about purpose, not about conquest. Conquest was assumed, like breathing. About purpose beyond conquest. About what the Sith were for. And every single one of them described it differently. One called it perfect power, the ability to reshape the Force itself according to will. Another called it completion, becoming something beyond the limitation of mortality. Another called it truth, knowing the full nature of the Force without the Jedi's filters. Same civilization, same tradition, completely different answers to the same question. This tells us something. It tells us the Sith were not as unified in their beliefs as they appeared from the outside. It also tells us that the question, what are we actually reaching for, was never settled. Not in the beginning, not in the middle, not, as far as we can tell, at the end. The records get cleaner as we move forward in time. Cleaner, but not necessarily more honest. The more powerful the Sith became, the more carefully they controlled what was written about them. Holocrons replaced stone carvings. Academy-trained historians replaced oral tradition. Official accounts replaced personal ones. And something was lost in that transition. The early records, fragmentary, contradictory, sometimes barely readable, have a quality that the later ones don't. They sound like people. Confused people. People who were not entirely sure what they were doing. People who were afraid sometimes. The later records sound like monuments. And monuments are built to be seen, not to be believed. Now, we move forward, past the early empire, past the great hyperspace war, past several centuries of rise and fall. We move to a battlefield, a specific one, a moment that is small in size and enormous in consequence. It is 1000 BBY. The place is Ruusan. The battle has just ended. The 7th Battle of Ruusan is the moment most historians mark as the end of the Sith. The official end. The declared end. The Brotherhood of Darkness, the last great Sith army, has been destroyed. Not just defeated. Destroyed from within. By one of their own. A Sith Lord named Darth Bane had decided, before the battle, that the Brotherhood was already a failure. Too many Sith. Too much fighting between themselves. Too much wasted power pointed inward instead of outward. His solution was simple and terrible. He let them destroy themselves. And in the aftermath, he walked through the wreckage and began building something new. Something smaller. Something more dangerous than any Sith army had ever been. We will come back to Darth Bane several times. He is one of the most important figures in this entire archaeology, and also one of the most misunderstood. But for now, we stay on the battlefield. After the battle, in the quiet, a Jedi scout named Calibrin moved through the wreckage of Ruusan 3 days after the fighting stopped. Her job was simple. Catalog what was left. Identify survivors. Recover anything that needed to be recovered. She was good at her job. She had done it before, on other battlefields, after other wars. She knew what dead battlefields felt like. She knew what to expect. Ruusan felt different. She wrote about it in the report she filed afterward, a short field document, not a literary text, just a soldier's account of what she found. The battlefield felt like something was missing, she wrote. Not the dead. The dead were there. Not the wreckage. The wreckage was everywhere. Something else was missing. She could not say what. She wrote, "It feels like a room after someone has just left it." On the third day of her search, she found the object. She almost missed it. It was small, smaller than she expected, something that powerful to be. Dark crystal, roughly geometric, not quite the shape of a Jedi holocron, but close enough to be recognizable as the same category of thing. It was sitting in the dirt, partially covered by ash. She picked it up. The moment she touched it, she stopped walking. She stood there for a while. She wrote afterward that she did not know how long. The object was cold. Not cold like metal in winter. Cold like something that had never been warm. And it was heavy. Not physically heavy, she could hold it easily in one hand. Heavy in another way. The way a decision feels heavy before you make it. The weight of something that matters, and you do not yet know how much. She tried to open it. Nothing happened. She tried again. Nothing. She held it and felt it, and could sense, through the force, that something was inside it. Something organized. Something that had been placed there deliberately. Something that was waiting. She could not get to it. The object would not open for her. She wrote in her report, "The item resists access. Contains dark side energy. Recommends secure transfer to temple archives for further study. Unable to determine contents." Then she wrote one more line. A personal note, added at the bottom, slightly outside the formal structure of the report. She wrote, "I did not want to put it down." She put it down eventually. She packed it carefully. She sent it to Coruscant. She moved on to the next section of the battlefield. She did not write about the object again. But that last line stays with you. I did not want to put it down. From a Jedi trained in detachment. Trained to release, not to hold. Trained to let things go. She did not want to put it down. The object did that to people, it turns out. It would do it again to others across the centuries that followed. That is a story for later. For now, stand with Karla Bryn on the Ruusan battlefield. The Sith are officially gone. The Republic will declare them extinct within the year. A new calendar will be started. Time itself will be reset from this moment. The long war is over. And a Jedi scout is standing in the ash holding something she cannot open and does not want to release. And somewhere on that same battlefield, or perhaps already off it, already moving, already planning, Darth Bane is walking away. Alive, undetected, with an idea in his mind that will not bear fruit for 1,000 years. This brings us to the question. The one that sits at the center of this entire archaeology. The one that the records circle around without ever answering. The one that stays with you if you spend long enough in the Sith archives. Did the Sith ever actually believe they would win? Or did they need the war itself more than they needed the victory? Think about what the evidence shows. Every time the Sith were destroyed, they rebuilt. Not with less urgency. With more. Every defeat was followed by a version of the Sith that was more focused, more driven, more absolutely certain of its own purpose than the version before it. That is not what winning looks like. Winning looks calm. Winning looks satisfied. What the Sith showed, across 25,000 years, looks more like need. The need to keep reaching. The need to keep fighting. The need to keep being the thing that was not yet finished. Maybe the Sith were not building toward victory. Maybe they were building away from something. Maybe the war was not the path to what they wanted. Maybe the war was what they wanted. We do not know. The records do not say. The Sith themselves never wrote it down that clearly, if they understood it at all. And so we set that question down here, in this chapter, on this battlefield, in the ash of Ruusan. We set it down the way Calla Bryn set down the holocron, carefully, with the knowledge that we are going to have to come back to it, and with no certainty about what we will find when we do. The holocron is on its way to Coruscant now, packed in a crate, riding a transport through hyperspace, cold and dark and absolutely patient. It has been patient for 1,000 years already. It will be patient for 1,000 more. There are places in the galaxy that hold things, not metaphorically, not poetically, literally. Places where something happened so many times, with so much weight behind it, that the ground itself changed. Where the stone absorbed what was poured into it. Where the air carries something that has no clean scientific explanation. Where you can walk in without knowing the history and still feel in your chest, in the back of your throat, in the place behind your eyes. That something here is different. Korriban is that kind of place. But it did not start that way. Before the Sith, Korriban was just a world. Harsh, dry, red stone under a pale sky. The kind of planet that most Republic survey teams would have catalogued, noted as inhospitable, and moved past. It had no strategic value, no significant resources. No hyperspace routes that made it worth fighting over. It was simply there, the way a lot of worlds are simply there, waiting for something to happen to them. But here is the thing that the Sith records almost never mention. When the Dark Jedi exiles arrived on Korriban, when they found the native Sith species and began the slow process of becoming something new together, the tombs were already there. Not the great tombs, not the enormous carved monuments that the Dark Lords would eventually build for themselves. Older tombs, much older, cut into the rock in a style that matched nothing in any known architectural tradition. Simple entrance, no carvings on the outside, no names, just openings in the red stone that went down into the dark. The native Sith knew about them. They had always known about them, but they did not claim to have built them, and they did not go inside them, not ever. When the first Sith historians asked the native population who had made the old tombs, the answer translated across 3 language barriers and recorded in documents that have been retranslated 4 times since was something close to, "They were here before memory." Nobody knows who built the original tombs on Korriban. The Sith never found out. Or if they did not record it. Which might mean the same thing. The species that carved those first chambers into the rock left no other trace. No language that survived. No artifacts that could be cleanly attributed to them. Just the tomb. Just the openings in the stone. Just the dark inside. The Sith built on top of them. This is one of the things you learn when you study Korriban carefully. The great tombs, the ones that bear the names of Dark Lords, the ones that were designed to be seen from a distance, the ones that were carved with power and decorated with threat. Many of them were built over the original structures. On top of them, around them, as if the Sith instinctively understood that something in that older stone was worth being close to, worth building near, worth absorbing. The first Dark Lord to build a tomb on Korriban that matched the scale of what the Sith would eventually become was a figure known in the records as Ajunta Pol, one of the original Dark Jedi exiles, one of the most powerful of them. His tomb was built not because he was dead, he commissioned it himself while he was still alive. That was a Sith tradition that began with him and continued for thousands of years. You built your tomb while you had the power to make it exactly what you wanted. You did not leave that decision to someone else. Paul's tomb was large enough to house a small city. It went deep into the rock. It was designed to be intimidating, even to people who had never heard his name. The message was simple. The message was, look at what I was capable of. Look at what I left behind. Remember me whether you want to or not. Other Dark Lords followed, each one building larger, each one going deeper, each one trying to make the statement that the one before them had not quite managed to make. Over centuries, the Valley of the Dark Lords became exactly what its name suggests. Not just a burial ground, a competition, a long, slow argument between dead people about who had mattered most. The tombs pressed against each other. Some of the later ones were built so close to the earlier ones that the foundations touched. The stone mixed. The histories mixed. The dark side energy that each tomb was built to hold and concentrate and project mixed. This is important. This is one of the things that makes Korriban different from other places of significant dark side concentration. The Sith did not just build on this world. They built into it. They poured dark side energy into the stone deliberately. Rituals designed to anchor power to place. Ceremonies meant to make the planet itself a kind of weapon, or a kind of memory. They wanted Korriban to remember them. They wanted the stone to hold their names even after the stone carvings wore away. The stone obliged. The Sith Empire fell. It rose. It fell again. The Valley of the Dark Lords was abandoned during the Empire's collapses and reoccupied during its returns. Each time it was reoccupied, the new Sith found the old tombs waiting, undisturbed, intact, heavy with something that the new arrivals could feel immediately. Every generation of Sith that came to Korriban reported the same thing in their earliest accounts. The place feels occupied, even when it is empty. Even when there has been no living Sith here for 100 years. The place feels like it is being used. Like something is still happening here. By the time of the old Sith Empire's later periods, approximately 3,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, Korriban had become the heart of Sith identity. Not just a burial ground, a training ground. An academy was built near the valley. Students came from across the Empire to learn here, to be tested here, to be, in some cases, broken here. The Sith believed that proximity to the valley accelerated dark side development, made the Force more accessible, made certain aspects of Sith power easier to reach. They were probably right. The concentration of dark side energy in the stone was enormous by then. Thousands of years of deliberate pouring. Thousands of years of ritual and death and accumulated weight. The stone had become something that affected the people near it. Trained Sith felt it as a resource, something to draw from. Untrained visitors felt it differently. The records from non-Sith visitors to Korriban are rare. The Sith did not encourage tourism, but there are a few. Merchants who came for trade during periods of relative peace. Ambassadors during brief diplomatic contacts. The occasional prisoner who survived long enough to be exchanged. None of them described the place the same way, but all of them described it as wrong. In different words. Wrong in the way a room feels wrong when something bad has recently happened in it. Wrong in the way an animal feels wrong when it is pretending to be calm. Wrong in the way of something that is waiting. The academy on Korriban was destroyed multiple times, rebuilt multiple times. Each version of it slightly different from the last, but always in the same place. Always near the valley. Always close to the stone. Because every Sith leader who rebuilt it understood, instinctively or deliberately, that the location mattered. That you could not build a Sith academy somewhere else and get the same results. The place was part of the training. The place was part of the lesson. What the lesson actually was, nobody wrote it down clearly. But the students learned something here that could not be learned anywhere else. Something that the stone was teaching in its slow, cold way. Something about what the Sith had always been reaching toward. Now we move forward, past the Empire's later periods, past several more cycles of collapse and return. We arrive at 990 BBY. 10 years before the Battle of Ruusan. 10 years before the official end of the Sith. The Jedi Council sent an expedition to Korriban in 990 BBY. Not a military expedition, a research one. 8 Jedi. Their mission was to catalog what remained of the Sith Academy, which had been abandoned for approximately 40 years at that point. To assess the dark side concentration. To recover any artifacts that could be useful to the Order's understanding of Sith techniques, and to determine whether the site was stable, whether it was safe, whether the valley, without active Sith presence, was returning to something neutral. The mission lasted 3 weeks. 6 of the 8 Jedi returned to Coruscant at the end of it. 2 did not. They were not dead. This is important. They were not killed. They were not taken prisoner. They were, by every physical measure, fine. They simply would not leave. The Jedi Council's records from this incident are careful, clinical. They describe the situation without quite explaining it. 2 members of the expedition, a senior knight named Dorak Sen and a younger Padawan named Yela Maru, declined to board the transport when the mission concluded. They were not acting aggressively. They were not in distress, at least not visibly. They sat down near the entrance to the valley and said they were not finished. When asked what they were not finished with, neither of them answered clearly. The expedition lead wrote in his report, "They appear to be listening to something." He waited 2 additional days. They did not move. He left a communication device and departed. Both Jedi eventually returned to Coruscant on their own, approximately 6 weeks after the rest of the team. Both were evaluated by the Council. Both were cleared for continued service. But both were asked to submit written accounts of what had kept them there. And both did. The accounts do not agree. Dorak Sen wrote that he had heard something in the stone. Not a voice, not language. A frequency, he called it. Something below the range of normal hearing but present in the Force like a low, continuous note. He wrote that the note was not threatening. It was not calling him toward anything. It was simply there. And he found that he could not make himself leave while it was there. As if leaving would mean losing something he had not yet understood. He wrote, "I know this sounds like a failure of discipline. I have examined it as such. I do not believe that is what it was. I believe the stone was saying something. I was not able to translate it. I am not sure translation is the right word for what would have been required." Yela Maru wrote something different. She wrote that she had not heard anything. She had felt something, a weight. Not the dark side energy, she was trained to sense that, and it was everywhere on Korriban, expected, catalogued, accounted for. Something underneath the dark side energy. Something older, she wrote. It felt like the place was grieving. She then crossed out that word and wrote it again. Left it, she wrote. I know that is not a technical description. I cannot offer a technical description. The place was grieving something. I do not know what. I do not know for whom. I stayed because it seemed wrong to leave a grieving place without, I do not know the right word, without acknowledgement. 2 Jedi. The same valley. The same 3 weeks. One heard something below language. One felt something below the dark side. Neither description is compatible with the other. Both descriptions feel true. This is what Korriban does to careful people. It gives them experiences that do not match anyone else's experience. It makes consensus impossible. It takes the thing you are most prepared to understand and shows you something just outside that preparation, and it makes you stay. The Academy was rebuilt 2 years after this expedition. The Brotherhood of Darkness, the last great Sith army before Ruusan, took Korriban back and rebuilt the training structures. Dorak Sen's name appears in the records that catalogue what they found when they returned. He had left a written note near the valley entrance. In the note, he described the location of several artifacts he had found during the expedition and chosen not to remove. He wrote, "I left them where they were. They belong here." Moving them seemed like the wrong kind of interruption. The Brotherhood catalogued the artifacts and moved them anyway. This seems fitting. The Sith were never good at leaving things where they were. After Ruusan, the valley emptied again. The Academy burned. The tombs remain. Nobody rebuilt this time. The Brotherhood was gone. The Sith were officially extinct. Korriban became a ruin. And ruins, if left alone long enough, become something else. They become archives. The stone on Korriban holds approximately 7,000 years of accumulated dark side energy as of 19 ABY. This is not a metaphor. This is as close to a measurable fact as the situation allows. 7,000 years of ritual. 7,000 years of dark side practitioners training, fighting, dying, and being buried in the same stone. 7,000 years of a civilization pouring itself into the ground. The ground held it. All of it. The ground is still holding it now. When the New Republic researchers visited in 17 ABY, they brought instruments. The readings they got were outside the expected range for dark side concentration. Not slightly outside. Significantly. More than the models predicted for a site that had been abandoned and unused for 1,000 years. The senior researcher noted this in the official report and offered a possible explanation. She wrote, "It is possible that dark side energy, once concentrated in stone through sustained ritual practice, does not dissipate at the rate we assumed. It is possible that the stone is not merely a location where dark side events occurred. It is possible that the stone is itself a kind of storage, that the energy is not fading, that it is simply sitting there, contained, waiting for." She stopped the sentence there. The dash is in the original document. She did not finish the sentence. The report moves to the next measurement. Whatever she was going to write after that dash, whatever she thought the energy might be waiting for, she kept it to herself. Stand in the valley now. 19 AB. Late afternoon. The sky is the color it has always been, pale and dry and enormous. The tombs face each other across the red stone. Their entrances are dark. The inscriptions above them, thousands of names, thousands of titles, thousands of declarations of power and permanence, are weathered. Some of them are no longer readable. The Dark Lords who built those inscriptions believed they would last forever. Some of them have. Some of them are dust. The stone does not distinguish between the two. The stone holds all of it with the same patient weight. There is a sound in the valley at certain times of day. The researchers documented it. A low sound, coming from deep inside one of the oldest tomb structures. The instruments could not identify the source. It was not wind, the readings showed no significant air movement in the relevant chamber. It was not settling stone, the acoustic profile was wrong for that. It was not any of the standard explanations that the researchers tried. The sound was simply there. Low, continuous, coming from somewhere below the floor of the oldest structure in the valley, below the Sith construction, below the Dark Lord monuments, below everything the Sith built. From somewhere in the original stone, the stone that was here before memory, the stone that was carved by the species whose name did not survive them. One of the researchers stood at the entrance to that oldest structure for a long time. Her colleague asked what she was doing. She said she was listening. Her colleague asked what she heard. She did not answer right away. When she did, she used a word that appeared in neither of the earlier Jedi accounts from 990 BBY, neither Dorak Sen's account nor Yila Maru's account. She said, "It sounds like it's counting something." Nobody asked what it was counting. The report does not record whether anyone thought to ask. The report moves to the next section, the next measurement, the next safe, documentable observation, and the sound continues. Down in the oldest stone, counting something, patient, the way everything on Korriban is patient, the way the Sith taught it to be. The official records of every Jedi victory over the Sith say roughly the same thing. Darkness was defeated. Light prevailed. The threat is past. These records are not lies, but they are not the whole truth either. Because alongside the official records filed separately, stored in different sections of the archive, sometimes sealed for decades before anyone thought to open them, there are the other accounts, the private ones, the ones written not for history, but for the writer themselves. Letters never sent, journal entries never published, personal logs that ended up in the archive by accident more than intention. These accounts say something different, something the official records could not afford to say, something the Jedi Order, across multiple eras, found deeply inconvenient. The Sith were not what we said they were. That is the thing the private records keep circling back to. Not in those exact words, but in that direction, again and again, from different writers, different eras, different wars. The same uncomfortable conclusion showing up in the margins of history like a word someone keeps writing, and then crossing out, and then writing again. We are going to look at two of these accounts today. Two witnesses, two enemies of the Sith who saw something that their order's official position did not have room for. We are not going to resolve what they saw. We are just going to look at it. The first account comes from the Great Hyperspace War, one of the earliest and most devastating conflicts between the Republic and the Sith Empire. The Sith Lord Naga Sadow led an invasion of Republic space that came very close to succeeding. The Republic held. The Sith were pushed back. Naga Sadow fled. The Sith Empire fractured in the aftermath. This is the official version, accurate as far as it goes. Among the Jedi generals who fought in that war was a woman named Odin. You may know that name. He was a male Drathos Jedi Master, the records use he, and we follow the records. But fighting alongside him, less documented, less celebrated, was a general whose name the official histories record only partially. She is listed as General Sarna in the campaign documents. No family name, no homeworld, no detailed biography, just a rank and a name and a role in several key engagements. She survived the war. She lived for another 30 years after it, and in those 30 years, she wrote. not for publication. For herself, her journals were recovered in 450 BBY when a Jedi archive on Ossus was reorganized. They had been filed under miscellaneous correspondence. Nobody had read them in centuries. The archivist who found them flagged them as historically significant and had them translated and preserved. Then she sealed them, with a note attached that said, "Requires review before general access." They were reviewed in 200 BBY. They were not opened to general access until 12 ABY, 40 years after they should have been. The delay was not accidental. General Sana's journals cover many things: daily life, strategy, observations about the Force, grief for soldiers she lost. But woven through all of it, appearing in different forms across 30 years of writing, is a single thread: her attempt to understand the Sith she had fought. Not to excuse them, not to justify them, to understand them. Because something she had seen in the war did not match what she had been taught about the Sith before the war began. She writes, in an entry dated approximately 5 years after the conflict ended, "I was taught that they were evil. I believed this before I saw them fight. During the war, I had to revise what I meant by that word. They were not evil the way the Council described evil. They were not simply dark where we were light. They were afraid. Afraid in a way I did not recognize at first, because it had been compressed into something that looked like aggression, like certainty, like absolute conviction. But I have seen enough frightened people in my life to recognize the shape of fear, even when it has been hardened into something else." She continues, "What they were afraid of, I could not say with certainty. Weakness, perhaps, limitation. The idea that they might reach the end of their lives without having become what they believed they were supposed to become. This is not so different from fears I have seen in our own order. The difference is what they did with it." She wrote this 5 years after the war. She spent the next 25 years trying to figure out what to do with it. She never published it. She never presented it to the Council. She sat with it, turned it over, added to it, came back to it, as if she knew that the thing she had seen was true, and also knew that there was no good place to put it. The Jedi Council's official position on the Sith, across most of recorded history, was consistent. The Sith chose the dark side. They chose fear, anger, hatred. They chose these things because they rejected the discipline and selflessness that the light side required. They were not victims of their choices. They were the authors of them. This position is not entirely wrong, but General Sana's journals suggest it is not entirely complete either. The Sith chose, but the thing they were choosing from the thing underneath the choice was not simple darkness. It was a particular kind of pain. Pain that had been there long enough to forget it was pain. Pain that had become identity. We move forward now, approximately 400 years. A different war. A different kind of Sith. The Mandalorian Wars ended in approximately 3,960 BBY. What followed was something the historians still struggle to categorize cleanly. A Jedi Knight named Revan, who had led Republic forces against the Mandalorians without the Council's blessing, disappeared into the unknown regions with his closest ally, Malak. They returned as Sith Lords, leading a Sith empire that had not been there before they left. The Jedi Civil War followed. It was devastating. It ended when Revan, captured by the Jedi, his memory erased, rebuilt into something that could be guided back toward the light, turned on Malak, and helped end the conflict he had started. This is the official version. It appears in Republic histories, in Jedi teaching texts, in HoloNet documentaries made thousands of years later. It is accurate, but it misses something. Among the Jedi who survived the Jedi Civil War was a knight named Hazen Mole. Not famous, not a hero of the conflict in any celebrated sense. He survived it. That was his primary distinction. He survived Malachor V. He survived the campaigns that followed. He survived to old age, which was not something most Jedi of his generation managed. And in his old age, he wrote a memoir, not sealed, not restricted, published actually, in a limited run distributed to Jedi temples across the Republic. The Council approved it, with one condition. A single chapter was removed before publication. The chapter has survived in draft form in the Jedi archives. The chapter is about Revan. Hazen Mole writes in the removed chapter, "I fought under Revan before he left for the unknown regions. I fought against him after he returned. I was at Malachor V. I watched what he built and what he became, and then what the Council made him into afterward. I have been trying for 30 years to say clearly what I think Revan understood that the rest of us did not. I am not sure I have found the words yet, but I will try again." He tries. He writes that Revan had understood something about the Force that the Jedi Order's structure actively prevented its members from seeing. He does not say the dark side was right. He is careful about this. He says, specifically, that the dark side was a destruction, that he saw what it did to Revan and to the people around Revan, and he had no illusions about the cost. But Revan had looked at the full Force. He had looked at both sides of it, not as opposites, but as a single thing. The Council taught us to look at half of it and call the other half forbidden. Revan looked at all of it. What he found there broke him, but he had looked. And I think I have thought this for 30 years, and I still think it, that what broke him was not that he was wrong to look. It was that he looked alone. The Council removed this chapter. The approved reason in the archive record is theologically inconsistent with established Order teaching. A second reason is not recorded, but it is not difficult to imagine, because what Hazen Mole was saying carefully, from 30 years of sitting with it, was that the Jedi Order's understanding of the Force was incomplete, that the Sith had found something real, not good, not safe, not anything that justified what they had done with it, but real, and that the Order's response to that real thing had been to look away from it. These two accounts, General Sarna's journals and Hazen Mole's removed chapter, are separated by approximately 400 years. They were written by different people, in different wars, about different Sith. They do not know about each other. They were not in conversation, and yet they are saying the same thing, in different words, from different angles, the same uncomfortable, inconvenient, unresolvable thing. The Sith were not simply the opposite of the Jedi. They were the Jedi's shadow, the part that the Jedi Order could not integrate, could not acknowledge, could not look at directly. No, we are not saying the Sith were right. We are not saying the Jedi were wrong. We are saying that the relationship between the two was more complicated than either side's official records admitted. We are saying that the Sith's enemies, at least some of them, the careful ones, the ones who looked closely enough, saw something in the Sith that the Sith's own chronicles missed. The Sith wrote about themselves as chosen, us inevitably, as the correction the galaxy required. Their enemies, the ones writing in private, the ones not performing for history, wrote about them as wounded, as afraid, as reaching towards something they could not name, as people who had found something real in the Force, and then destroyed themselves, and everyone around them trying to hold on to it. Both versions are in the archive. They do not agree. We do not resolve them. We simply hold both. The way the stone on Korriban holds everything poured into it, without judgment, without resolution, with only the weight of what was placed there. There is one more thing in Hazen Mole's removed chapter. One more observation. It comes near the end of what he wrote. After 30 years of thinking about Revan, after a lifetime of trying to put into words what he had seen, he writes, "The question I cannot answer, the one I think nobody can answer from the outside, is whether they knew, whether any of them knew that what they were reaching toward was not going to be there when they arrived. Whether somewhere beneath the certainty and the philosophy and the absolute conviction of their own destiny, any Sith Lord in any era ever looked at the path they were on and understood that the end of it was empty." He pauses. You can feel the pause in the way the next sentence is written. I watched Revan at the end. When Malak was dead and the war was over and the thing he had built was finished, I was close enough to see his face, and I have never been able to decide what I saw there. He does not say what he saw. He ends the chapter there. The Council cut it anyway. If the Sith were trying to fill something, if General Sana was right, that underneath the hardened aggression was a fear she recognized, if Hazen Mole was right, that Revan had found something real and then lost himself trying to hold it, then the question this archaeology has to ask is, what was the shape of what was missing? What was the hole that 25,000 years of reaching was trying to fill? The Sith never wrote it down that clearly. Their enemies came closer than the Sith did, and their enemies still could not say it with certainty. We are going to follow that question forward now, not through the Sith themselves, through what they left behind, in the places they never conquered, in the institutions they never touched, in the slow, quiet, enormous consequence of a decision made on a battlefield that shaped the next 1,000 years without anyone understanding it at the time. There is a kind of danger that nobody fears, not because it isn't real, because it doesn't look like danger. It looks like a trade dispute. It looks like a procedural vote. It looks like a senator recommending a particular candidate for a committee position. It looks like paperwork. It looks like the ordinary, grinding, unremarkable business of a civilization managing itself. And that is exactly what makes it work. Darth Bane understood something that no Sith before him had managed to understand. Not fully, not practically enough to build from. He understood that the Sith had been losing for the wrong reason, not because they were weak, not because the Jedi were stronger, not because the dark side was inferior to the light. They had been losing because they were visible. Every time the Sith built an army, the Republic could see it. Every time they conquered a system, the Republic could respond. Every time they moved in force, they gave their enemy something to push against. And the Republic, given something to push against, pushed back. Every time, for thousands of years. The same cycle. The Sith surge forward. The Republic absorbs it. The Republic recovers. The Sith are defeated. Again and again and again. Bane looked at this pattern and drew a conclusion that should have been obvious centuries earlier. The Sith could not win a war they started, so they would stop starting wars. They would start something else instead. Something with no name. Something that did not look like a Sith strategy because it did not look like anything at all. The rule of two was not just about numbers. This is the part the histories tend to miss. They focus on the arithmetic. 2 Sith, 1 master, 1 apprentice. The power of many concentrated in 2. This is accurate but incomplete. The rule of 2 was about patience. It was about changing what the Sith were optimizing for. Not conquest, not battle, not the accumulation of territory or armies or open power. Time. The Sith under the rule of 2 were optimizing for time, for the slow accumulation of position, for the kind of influence that does not show up in any military report because it does not look like influence. It looks like normal politics. Bane died. His apprentice, Zana, took over. Zana trained an apprentice. That apprentice trained an apprentice. The chain continued. Each link in the chain was given the same core instruction, passed down in different forms but always carrying the same meaning. Do not be seen. Do not move quickly. Do not reach for the thing you want before the ground beneath it is prepared. Prepare the ground. Always prepare the ground. The ground they were preparing was the Republic itself, and they prepared it for 1,000 years. We are going to look at specific moments, not battles, not dramatic confrontations, moments that do not appear in any history of the Sith, moments that appear, if they appear at all, in the footnotes of Republic administrative records. Small moments, ordinary moments, moments that together form a shape that no single person alive in 19 ABY has fully mapped. Sithtimeline BB. The Outer Rim. A trade dispute. The details are dry. They are supposed to be dry. A consortium of mid-rim trading companies filed a complaint with the Republic Commerce Authority regarding preferential tariff treatment given to Outer Rim suppliers in the Manda sector. The complaint was legitimate. The tariff imbalance was real. The Commerce Authority reviewed it, made a ruling. The ruling favored the mid-rim consortium. The Manda sector suppliers lost significant contracts. 3 of the 4 major supply routes through the Manda sector became economically unviable within a decade. The sector's economic output dropped by roughly 1/3 over the following 20 years. The Republic garrison in the sector was reduced because there was less to protect and less money to protect it with. The sector became a gap, a thin place in the Republic's coverage of its own borders. The trade complaint was filed by a legitimate company with legitimate grievances. This is important. The company was not a Sith front. It was not aware of anything beyond its own business interests. But the lawyer who advised the company on how to structure the complaint, the lawyer who identified the specific regulatory language that would make the complaint most effective, the lawyer who had spent 15 years building a practice in exactly this area of Republic commercial law, had a teacher, a mentor, a woman who had funded his legal education and guided his early career, and who appears, in his personal correspondence, to have been deeply interested in Outer Rim border economics for reasons he never fully understood. That woman's name is not in any Sith record. She is not identified anywhere as a Sith agent. She lived a quiet life. She died of natural causes. She was never investigated. But her teacher, the person who had shaped her particular expertise and her particular interests, that connection goes one more step back, and one more step back after that. And at the end of that chain, if you follow it far enough, is a name that appears in documents from approximately 750 BBY. A name with no title, no affiliation, just a name, showing up in the background of several different situations across several different decades. Always quiet, always helpful, always slightly more interested in the long-term structural consequences of things than any ordinary person would need to be. The Manda sector never recovered its former economic position. It is still a thin place in what is now New Republic territory. Nobody has connected this to the Sith. Nobody in 19 ABY is looking at a 400-year-old trade dispute and asking who benefited from the border gap it created. Nobody has the full picture. We are possibly the only ones who can see it, and even we are not certain. 400 BB. Coruscant, the Jedi Temple. A council decision. The Jedi Order in 400 BBY was debating an internal question. How far into Republic political matters should the Order involve itself? The traditionalist position was that the Jedi served the Republic but remained separate from its political structures. The interventionist position was that the Jedi had a responsibility to be more actively involved in guiding Republic governance. This debate had been going on for decades. It came to a head in 400 BBY, when a series of Senate proposals would have formally embedded Jedi advisors in key Senate committees. The Council voted against it, narrowly, 5-4. The Order remained separate. The tradition of Jedi political non-involvement was reinforced. The senator who most vocally championed the traditionalist position in Senate debates that year was a well-regarded representative from a core world. He was known for his integrity, his long service, his deep respect for Jedi tradition. He had several close friendships within the Order. He died 8 years after this vote. He was, by every account anyone ever wrote about him, a good man. He appears in no Sith record. He was not a Sith agent. He genuinely believed what he argued. But the political mentor who had shaped his early career, the woman who had taught him how to frame arguments about institutional boundaries, who had spent years cultivating his particular understanding of why separation between the Jedi and the Senate was essential to both institutions, who had been, by his own account in his memoirs, the single most influential person in his political development. That woman had funding, quiet funding, from sources that passed through enough intermediary accounts that the origin was invisible. The origin, if you trace it through records, that nobody in 400 BBY thought to cross-reference, and that nobody in 19 ABY has yet cross-referenced, is older than she was, older than her mentor was, old enough to connect, with significant uncertainty, but not zero evidence, to the same quiet network that surfaces in the background of the Manda sector situation 2 centuries earlier. The Jedi remained separate from the Senate for 400 more years. By the time Palpatine needed them to be separate, needed them to be an institution without deep political roots, without allies embedded in Senate structures, without the kind of relationships that might have created warning when warning was needed. They already were. They had been for centuries. Because a senator with genuine integrity had argued genuinely for genuine reasons for a position that someone, somewhere, very far back, had decided it would be useful for people to hold. The Senate. A procedural change. This one is the smallest, and possibly the most important. The Senate in 300 BBY passed a reform package related to emergency powers. The reform was administrative. It clarified the conditions under which emergency executive authority could be granted to the Chancellor. It was presented as a cleanup measure, closing loopholes, clarifying ambiguous language in documents that were centuries old and had never been properly updated. The debate was brief. The vote was not close. Nobody objected significantly. It was, by every measure, unremarkable. The specific language that was added to the emergency powers clause in that reform, the particular phrasing that described the conditions under which the Senate could grant temporary supreme authority to a single executive, was drafted by a legal team working for the Senate's administrative office. The lead drafter was a career bureaucrat, a man who had spent 30 years in Senate administrative work, competent, careful, respected by colleagues. He had no known connection to the Sith. He had no known connection to anyone with a known connection to the Sith. The chain, in this case, does not trace back cleanly. It may not trace back at all. But the language he drafted, the specific, careful, seemingly technical language he added to a document that would sit in the Senate's legal foundation for 300 years, was the language that Palpatine used. At the end, when he stood in the Senate chamber and called for the power that the Republic had spent 3 centuries technically making available to whoever sat in the Chancellor's chair. "I love democracy. I love the Republic." He said that, in that chamber, using that legal framework. And the Senate applauded. We do not know if the drafter was part of the network. We do not know if the language was planted deliberately. It may have been coincidence. It may have been Palpatine finding a tool that happened to exist rather than one he had caused to exist. We hold this uncertainty honestly. The narrator cannot see everything. The picture may be incomplete. But here is what we can say. 3 moments. 600 400 BB. 300 BB. A border gap. A Jedi kept separate from the Senate. A legal clause sitting in a document waiting to be used. None of these things connect to the Sith in any official record. None of them were investigated as Sith activity. None of them would have seemed significant in isolation. But together, if you stand far enough back, if you look at the shape they form across 4 centuries, they look like preparation. They look like someone or some chain of someones, none of whom knew the full plan, most of whom may not have known there was a plan. Moving pieces into position, slowly, without urgency, without any of the theatrical certainty that the Sith armies of earlier centuries had shown, with only patience, with only the understanding that the ground being prepared now would be used by someone else later. Someone who would never know the ground had been prepared for them. Darth Bane never knew about Palpatine. Palpatine was born approximately 8 centuries after Bane died. Bane designed a system. He did not design the person who would eventually use it. He could not have. He was not that kind of genius. He was a different kind. He was the kind who understood that if you build the right container, something will eventually grow inside it. He built the container. He died. The container kept working. In 19 ABY, the Senate chamber on Coruscant is empty, not abandoned. The new Republic uses it, will use it, is in the process of deciding what it means and what it is for. But at this particular moment, in the quiet after everything, it is just a room, a very large room, with very old architecture, designed to make whoever stands at its center feel the weight of what surrounds them. It still does that. The weight is still there, different now, but the same room, the same stone, the same legal frameworks built into the walls of how it functions. Some of those frameworks are 300 years old. Some of them are older. Nobody has audited all of them yet. Nobody has gone through every procedural layer, and traced every clause back to its origin. Maybe they will. Maybe they won't find anything. Maybe the picture we have assembled here is incomplete in ways that would change its shape entirely. We hold that possibility. We do not resolve it. We simply note that the chamber looks the same as it always has, that the stone is the same stone, that the documents in the archive are the same documents, and that somewhere in all of that, in the ordinary, administrative, unremarkable machinery of a civilization governing itself, 1,000 years of patient preparation left marks that nobody has finished finding yet. It is not a weapon. This is the first thing to understand about it. It does not look like a weapon. It does not function like a weapon. It is smaller than you would expect, roughly the size of a closed fist. Dark crystal, not quite the shape of a Jedi holocron. Those tend toward the pyramidal, the geometric, the clean. This one is slightly irregular, as if the crystal grew around something rather than being cut into a deliberate form. It is cold to the touch. Not cold the way metal is cold. Cold the way something is cold when it has never been warm. When warmth was never part of what it was designed for. Calibrin packed it carefully on the Ruusan battlefield. She wrapped it in cloth. She put it in a case. She labeled the case with her field notation. Dark side artifact, unidentified. Recommends secure storage and analysis. She sent it to Coruscant on the next available transport. She moved on to the next section of the battlefield. She tried not to think about the line she had written at the bottom of her report. I did not want to put it down. She mostly succeeded. The holocron arrived at the Jedi Temple on Coruscant in 999 BBY. It was logged into the artifact registry, given a catalog number, assigned to the secure vault in the lower archive. A senior archivist reviewed it briefly upon arrival. His notes are short. Dark side holocron. Origin: Ruusan battlefield. Condition: intact. Access: restricted pending full assessment. Gatekeeper present, but unresponsive to initial contact attempts. He noted the cold. He did not note anything else unusual. He had other work to do. The catalog number was filed. The case was shelved. The vault door was closed. The temple went quiet around it, the way temples do. For the first 50 years, the holocron was reviewed periodically. Standard archival practice. Every significant dark side artifact in the temple's collection was checked at regular intervals. Condition assessment. Brief access attempts by qualified archivists. Notes filed. Case closed. The holocron was checked 11 times in its first 50 years in the vault. Each check produced roughly the same notes. Intact. Cold. Gatekeeper does not respond to standard activation protocols. Contents inaccessible. No deterioration observed. 11 checks. 11 sets of almost identical notes. Nothing unusual. Nothing to flag. Just a dark object sitting in a case in a vault doing nothing visible. Doing nothing visible. The 12th check was different. It was conducted in 947 BBY by an archivist named Bella Sorn. She was thorough. This is documented throughout her career record. She was the kind of archivist who did not just check condition and file notes. She sat with objects. She spent time with them. She believed, and had argued in several published papers, that dark side artifacts required more than technical assessment. They required attention. Patient, careful, unhurried attention. You had to be willing to wait, to let the object reveal what it was in its own time rather than on the archivist's schedule. She had a reputation for this approach. Some of her colleagues found it valuable. Some found it unsettling. She did not adjust her methods either way. She sat with the Bane holocron for 4 hours. She did not attempt to force it open. She did not use any of the standard access protocols. She simply held it, sat with it, paid attention to it. At some point during the 4 hours, she could not say exactly when she became aware of something. She wrote about it in her assessment notes, not the official assessment. The personal notation she kept alongside the official record, a habit she had developed over 30 years of archival work. She wrote, "The object is attentive." Then she wrote it again, as if testing whether the word still seemed right after she had written it once. "Attentive," she wrote. "It is not passive. I want to be precise about this. A passive object does not register that you are there. This object registers that you are there. I cannot explain this in terms that would satisfy the science division. I can only say that 4 hours in its presence felt less like examining an artifact and more like being examined by one. It is waiting for something. I do not know what. I am not sure the waiting is passive either. I think it is active waiting. The kind of waiting that is itself a form of doing." She filed the official notes. Intact, cold, contents, inaccessible, recommend continued secure storage. She did not include the personal notation in the official record. She went home. She came back the next day. She did not go back to the vault. She requested a transfer to a different section of the archive 2 weeks later. The request was approved without question. She worked in manuscript preservation for the rest of her career. She was good at it. She never wrote about the Bane holocron again. But she kept the personal notation. It was found among her papers after her death, 50 years later. Attentive. The word sitting there, circled, as if she had come back to it at some point and wanted to mark that she still believed it. The holocron sat. Years passed. Decades. The temple above it changed in small ways and large ones. New Jedi came. Old ones died. The Republic shifted and adjusted and managed its various crises in the way large institutions manage crises imperfectly, slowly, but continuously. The vault was reorganized twice. The catalog system was updated once. The holocron received a new catalog number. It was moved from one shelf to another in the same vault. Otherwise, nothing changed. It sat in its case, cold, patient, waiting. In 200 BBY, a senior archivist named Jocasta knew. Not the Jocasta knew most people know. Our predecessor, an earlier archivist who held the same role and left similar records. This archivist attempted a more serious access effort. She had spent a year preparing. She had studied everything the archive had on Sith holocron construction, every recovered document on Bane-era artifacts, every previous access attempt and its results. She came to the vault with a methodology, a careful, well-researched, genuinely expert methodology. She tried for 3 hours. The gatekeeper appeared once. Briefly, the likeness of Darth Bane, or what the holocron's construction presented as Darth Bane, materialized above the crystal for approximately 40 seconds. It looked at her. It did not speak. It disappeared. The holocron closed again. She wrote in her notes, "The gatekeeper assessed me and found me insufficient. I do not mean this as a criticism of my own abilities. I mean it technically. The gatekeeper has a threshold. I did not meet it. The threshold is not knowledge. It is not forceability. I am not certain what it is." The gatekeeper looked at me the way you look at someone who has arrived too early for something, not with hostility, with the mild inconvenience of a schedule disrupted. She tried twice more in the following weeks. The gatekeeper did not appear again. She wrote, "It has decided the conversation is over. I am not sure who decides when the next one begins." She recommended the holocron remain in restricted storage indefinitely. She also recommended that whoever next attempted access should be someone the dark side would recognize as its own. This recommendation was noted. It was not acted upon. The Order did not send dark side practitioners to open dark side holocrons. This was a firm policy. The recommendation sat in the file. The file sat in the archive. The holocron sat in the vault. What was inside it? We know some of this, not from anyone who successfully opened it. From fragments, from partial records of what Bane's teachings contained, from the chain of apprentices who received his philosophy directly before the holocron was made, from the very few moments when the gatekeeper spoke across 800 years of access attempts and said something before closing again. The holocron did not contain battle techniques. It did not contain Sith alchemy. It did not contain the kind of dark side knowledge that most people imagine when they imagine a Sith holocron. What it contained was an argument, a single, carefully constructed, philosophically rigorous argument. The argument was this: 2 Sith in secret are more dangerous than 1,000 Sith in the open. That is the core of it. The rest of the holocron, all of its considerable contents, was the unpacking of that argument. Every implication, every application, every counter-argument considered and dismissed, every historical example used to support the thesis, every instruction for how to live inside this argument, how to think inside it, how to breathe inside it, how to raise an apprentice inside it, how to die inside it, how to make sure the argument survived your death. It is strange to think about, holding an argument in your hands. Most arguments exist in language, in documents, in the exchange between people. They change as they travel. They get distorted. They get interpreted. They get used for things their originators never intended. But a holocron preserves the argument in the voice of the person who made it, with the gatekeeper ready to respond, to apply the argument to new situations, to extend it forward in time, to make the argument available to whoever the gatekeeper decided was ready to receive it. The Bane holocron was not just a record of a philosophy. It was the philosophy, still active, still capable of teaching. 800 years after the man who built it was dead. It is impossible to hold an argument in your hands, but the holocron came very close. In 52 BBY, approximately 30 years before the Clone Wars, the temple records show an anomaly, a brief, unexplained activation of a dark side artifact in Vault 7. The artifact's catalog number matches the Bane holocron. The activation lasted 11 minutes. It was flagged automatically by the Vault's monitoring system. An archivist was sent to investigate. She found nothing unusual. The holocron was in its case, cold, undisturbed. She filed a report attributing the anomaly to a monitoring system error. The date of this activation, cross-referenced with temple visitor logs from the same period, corresponds to a diplomatic visit by a young senator from Naboo. The senator had access to the public areas of the temple, not the vaults, not officially. The vaults were restricted. There is no record of any visitor accessing Vault 7 during this period. There is only the activation, 11 minutes. and a monitoring note that says, "Gatekeeper spoke." The report does not say what the gatekeeper said. The archivist who filed it may not have known, or she may have known and not written it down. Or the gatekeeper spoke to someone the monitoring system could not detect. Someone standing in a restricted vault with a catalog number already memorized. Someone who had been patient enough to wait for exactly the right moment. Someone the dark side would have recognized as its own. We do not know. We set this down carefully. We note the date. We note the 11 minutes. We note that the gatekeeper spoke. We note that after this activation, the next 50 years of vault records show no further anomalies related to this artifact, as if whatever the holocron had been waiting to do, it had done. The temple burned in 19 BBY. Order 66. The clones. The Jedi who tried to hold the temple and could not. The vaults in the lower archive were not the primary target. But fire does not follow priorities. The lower archive was damaged. Some vaults were breached. The post-destruction inventory, conducted by Imperial archivists who were looking for specific things and may not have been thorough about everything else, does not definitively account for the Bane holocron. It is listed as status unknown, not destroyed, not recovered, unknown. In 19 ABY, nobody knows where it is. It may be gone, destroyed in the fire or in the chaos that followed. It may be somewhere in the ruins of the temple, in a damaged vault, in a case that is still closed. It may have been found by someone in the years between 19 BBY and now. Someone who has not made this finding known. It may be anywhere, but wherever it is still cold. It is still patient. If the gatekeeper is still intact, if the crystal survived whatever happened to it, then somewhere in the galaxy, in an object no larger than a closed fist, Darth Bane's argument is still waiting, still attentive, still assessing whoever is in the room, still deciding whether the person holding it has arrived at the right time, or too early, or whether the schedule has been disrupted, or whether it simply needs to wait a little longer. The temple is quiet now. What remains of it? The vault where the holocron sat for 800 years is damaged. The shelf where its case rested is gone. The catalog number exists only in records. The object itself, unknown, patient. The same patience it was built to hold. The same patience it spent 1,000 years teaching. Think about a flame passed from one candle to another. The fire is the same fire, but each candle burns it differently. And by the time it reaches the 10th candle, the first one is long dead. This is what happened to the rule of two. Not a betrayal, not a corruption. Something quieter than that. Something that happens to every idea that has to travel through human hands across centuries. It changed, slowly, in small ways that each individual carrier would not have recognized as change. Each one believed they were being faithful. Each one was, to their version, which was already a version of a version, already a translation of a translation, already carrying the marks of everyone who had held it before them. Bane's original idea was precise. We have enough fragments of his teaching to understand its shape. The rule of two existed for one purpose. Not survival, not accumulation, evolution. Bane believed the Sith had stagnated. That generations of internal competition, Sith killing Sith, power fracturing into factions, strength wasted on itself, had produced a civilization that was strong and going nowhere. His solution was to compress everything. Two Sith. All the power of the dark side, concentrated in two people. Those two people pushing against each other constantly. The master, setting the standard. The apprentice, trying to exceed it. The tension between them producing something neither could produce alone. Not just power. Better power. Refined power. A Sith who was stronger, sharper, more capable than any Sith before them. And then that Sith training the next one. Who would be stronger still? Generation by generation. An upward line. A deliberate cultivation of something approaching perfection. That was the idea. Clean, precise, ruthless in its logic. Darth Vader received this idea directly from Bane. She was his apprentice. She heard it from his own mouth. She understood it. She was also a person who had survived things that changed how she understood survival. And survival, for Vader, was not a step toward something. It was the thing itself. She was a child when the Brotherhood of Darkness destroyed itself at Ruusan. She had seen what happened to Sith who fought openly, who gathered in numbers, who made themselves visible. She had watched an entire generation of dark side practitioners kill themselves in a ritual meant to destroy their enemies and managing mostly to destroy themselves. She had survived it. She had found Bane in the aftermath. She had been trained by him. And everything Bane taught her about evolution and perfection, she received through the filter of what she had already learned on her own, which was, the ones who survive are the ones who are still there when everything else is gone. Vader took Bane's ideal of evolution and quietly rebuilt it around survival. Not deliberately, not consciously, the way people rebuild ideas around their own deepest experiences without noticing they have done it. She trained her apprentice with enormous patience and genuine skill. She passed on the secrecy, the discipline, the long view, but the upward line, the deliberate cultivation toward perfection, became something slightly different in her hands. It became endurance. Stay hidden. Stay alive. Stay in position. Wait. The idea shifted. Just slightly. Just enough. Her apprentice received it as endurance. And built from there. The middle of the chain is difficult to trace. The Sith were successful at secrecy in ways that make the historians' work genuinely hard. There are names in the archive that appear once and then disappear. Figures who surface briefly in the background of Republic records, a financial decision here, a political connection there, and then are gone. Masters and apprentices whose relationship was never documented because documentation was exactly what they were trained to avoid. We have fragments. We have the shape of the chain without all the links. What we can say is this. Across the centuries between Vader and Palpatine, the rule of two changed in a consistent direction. It moved from evolution toward accumulation. From Bane's upward line toward a different kind of growth. Not becoming better, becoming more embedded, more positioned, more woven into the structures of the galaxy in ways that could not be easily removed. Each generation of Sith added to this, quietly accumulated influence, quietly accumulated resources, quietly accumulated the kind of position that does not look like power because it is distributed through 1,000 ordinary channels. A business here, a political connection there. A family whose loyalty had been cultivated so carefully over so many generations that they did not know they were loyal to anything in particular. They simply made certain choices, called certain people first, trusted certain instincts, instincts that had been shaped by generations of quiet cultivation. This is what the middle of the chain produced. Not a more perfect Sith, a more embedded one. A Sith tradition that had grown roots into the galaxy so deep and so distributed that pulling it out would have required pulling out half of everything else as well. Bane had wanted to grow upward. His successors grew sideways, into everything. The idea changed. Nobody noticed, because nobody was looking at the full chain, only their own link. And then there was Palpatine. Palpatine received the full inheritance. Everything the chain had produced. The secrecy, the patience, the accumulated influence, the deep roots, the embedded positions, the 1,000 quiet channels. He received all of it, and he understood all of it, more completely than any of his predecessors had understood it. He could see the full shape of what the chain had built, not just his own link, the whole thing, from Ruusan to the present, from Bane's original idea through every distortion and every addition and every quiet sideways growth into the galaxy's structures. He saw it, he mapped it, he understood exactly what it was and what it was capable of. And then he added one thing that none of his predecessors had managed. One element, simple to describe, almost impossible to execute. He made the galaxy want to give him what he took. Every Sith before Palpatine who had reached for significant power had taken it. Through force, through coercion, through manipulation that the target, if they had understood it fully, would have resisted. The galaxy always resisted eventually. That was the cycle. Sith reach for power. Galaxy resists. Sith defeated. Palpatine broke the cycle, not by reaching differently, by making the reaching unnecessary. He did not take the Republic. The Republic gave itself to him, voted, applauded, stood in the Senate chamber, and cheered the end of the thing they had spent 1,000 years building, because he had made them afraid enough to want exactly what he was offering. And he had made the offering feel like rescue. This is the furthest point from Bane's original idea. Bane wanted to build a perfect Sith, a singular, refined being who had pushed against the limits of the dark side until something new emerged. What the chain produced instead was a politician, the most effective politician in galactic history. Someone who understood power not as a force phenomenon but as a social one, not as something you took from the Force, as something people gave you when you understood them well enough. Palpatine understood people. This is the part of him that the myth tends to flatten. The myth makes him simply evil, darkness embodied. The Emperor as symbol, the actual Palpatine, the one who spent decades in the Senate, who built relationships over years, who remembered names and preferences and fears, and used all of it with absolute precision, was more complicated than that, more human than that, which in some ways is more frightening. What was lost? This is the hardest part to talk about, because what was lost in the transmission was something that may never have been clearly present. Something in the earliest Sith records, in the fragments from Korriban, in the accounts of the native Sith species before the Dark Jedi arrived, in the oldest texts before the philosophy hardened into strategy. Something that reads like reaching, real reaching, not for power, not for victory, for something, an answer to something, a completion of something that felt incomplete. The early Sith records have this quality underneath all the declarations of power and inevitability, underneath the posturing, underneath the performance of certainty, something that feels like a question, a private question, One they were not sure the dark side could actually answer. But they kept asking it. By Palpatine's time, the question was gone, not answered. Gone. The Sith had stopped asking it somewhere in the middle of the chain, when survival became the priority, when accumulation became the method, when the philosophy hardened from a reaching into a strategy, the question calcified, became the declaration of certainty it had only ever been performing, became the myth instead of the search. Maybe this is what General Sana saw in the Sith she fought. Maybe this is what Hazen Mole saw in Revan's face at the end. The moment when someone who had been reaching realized they had stopped knowing what they were reaching for. We cannot know. The chain does not preserve this. The chain preserved the method, the secrecy, the patience, the discipline, the two-person structure. These things traveled intact. The thing underneath them, the thing that might have been the actual point, did not make it, may have been lost before anyone thought to carry it, may have been uncarryable. Some things cannot survive transmission. Some things only exist in the original moment. After that, you only have the impression they left. At midnight, in 32 BBY, in a Senate office on Coruscant, a man sits at a desk. The office is ordinary. A desk, a chair, documents organized by a competent and loyal staff. The lighting is set low. The senator, he is still a senator at this point, officially is reviewing trade legislation, line by line, with the careful attention of someone who finds nothing beneath his notice. The most powerful Sith in galactic history. The end of a 1,000-year chain. The final product of Bane's rule of two. Reviewing trade legislation. At midnight, alone. There is nothing dramatic about the image. No dark robes. No lightning. No declaration of power or destiny. Just a man at a desk. Working. Passé. The way everything in the Sith tradition had learned to be patient. The way the stone on Korriban was patient. The way the holocron in the vault was patient. The way the trade dispute and the legal clause and the quiet network of influence had all been patient. Patient in the same key. Learned from the same source. Transmitted through the same chain. Distorted. Added to. Something lost. Something gained. But the patience was intact. The patience made it all the way to the end. The trade legislation is signed. The senator sets it aside. He picks up the next document. The office is quiet. The Republic sleeps around him. It does not know what is sitting at that desk, going through its paperwork, one document at a time. Passé. In 19 ABY, if you ask someone what the Sith were, they will tell you a story. The story is not wrong, but it is not complete. And the parts it leaves out are the parts that matter most. The story goes like this. The Sith were ancient enemies of the Jedi. Powerful, dangerous, driven by hatred and hunger for power. They built empires. They started wars. They used the dark side of the Force to take what they wanted and destroy what they could not take. They wore darkness like armor. They carried red lightsabers. They made declarations, grand ones, about destiny and power and the inevitable victory of the strong over the weak. They were defeated again and again. And finally, above a forest moon, in the wreckage of a space station the size of a small moon, finally defeated for good. Light won, darkness lost. The Jedi were vindicated. The Republic, now the new Republic, could begin again. This story is told in HoloNet documentaries. in Jedi teaching texts written in the 4 years since Endor, in the speeches of New Republic politicians who need the story to be clean because clean stories are easier to build new governments on, in the conversations of ordinary people who lived through the Empire and need to understand what they lived through. The story is everywhere. It is already calcifying into the version that will be taught to children, the version that will appear in histories 100 years from now, the official version. And it is not wrong. Everything in it is true. The Sith were powerful. They did build empires. They did carry red lightsabers. They did make dramatic declarations. They were defeated. Light did win. Eventually. All of this is accurate. But accuracy is not the same as completeness. And what the story leaves out, what it cannot afford to include and still function as the kind of story people need right now, is significant. The myth of the Sith requires one thing above everything else. It requires the Sith to have been external, outside, something that came from out there and had to be pushed back, an invasion, an infection from elsewhere, something the galaxy could look at and say, that is not us. That came from somewhere else. We fought it. We won. We are safe now. The myth cannot accommodate the other version. The version where the Republic contained its own ending inside itself for 1,000 years. The version where the Senate that applauded Palpatine was not manipulated into doing something against its nature. It was doing exactly what its nature had quietly been shaped to do. Across centuries, through trade disputes and legal clauses and political mentors and quiet influence so distributed it left no single traceable mark. The myth cannot say, we did this to ourselves. We handed the key to someone who spent 1,000 years teaching us to hand it over, and we applauded when we did it. That version is true. It is also unbearable. And so the myth does what myths do when the truth is unbearable. It simplifies. It moves the origin outside. It makes the enemy external. It makes the defeat a battle rather than a slow interior collapse. It gives the story a shape that people can hold without the shape breaking them. This is not dishonest. This is what myths are for. A civilization that has survived something as enormous as 20 years of the Empire needs a story it can stand on. Something stable enough to build the next thing on top of. The myth provides that. The myth is doing necessary work, but it costs something. The cost is the real story. The real story of what the Sith actually were, and what the galaxy actually did. And what that means for what the galaxy might do again, if it does not understand what it actually did the first time. Let us look at specific things the myth gets wrong. Not wrong in the sense of fabricated. Wrong in the sense of incomplete in ways that matter. The myth presents the Sith as warriors, as an army, as a force that had to be met on a battlefield and defeated there. This is accurate for most of Sith history. The Great Hyperspace War was a military conflict. The Jedi Civil War was a military conflict. The new Sith Wars were military conflicts. For most of their existence, the Sith fought the way the myth describes. Openly, with armies, on battlefields. And they lost. Every time. Because the Republic, given something to fight, could fight. The myth does not account for the version that won. The version that put down the armies. That stopped fighting on battlefields. That moved into rooms like that midnight Senate office. Into trade legislation. Into procedural clauses. Into the quiet architecture of how a civilization governed itself. The myth cannot present this version because this version does not have a battlefield. It does not have a moment where you can point and say, There. That is where we should have stopped it. There is no there. There are only 1,000 small theirs spread across 1,000 years. And nobody living in any of those moments knew they were in one. The myth presents Palpatine as the Emperor, as the Dark Lord in the Black Throne, the hooded figure, the lightning, the absolute evil at the center of everything. This version of Palpatine is real. He was that. In the end, when the mask was gone and the performance was over and the thing underneath was visible, he was exactly what the myth says he was. But the myth does not present the other Palpatine, the one who existed for decades before the Emperor, the Senator, the Chancellor, the man at the midnight desk reviewing trade legislation, the man who remembered every name, who understood every fear, who built relationships over years with the patience of someone who had been trained in patience by 1,000 years of accumulated Sith discipline, the man who did not take the Republic, who made the Republic want to give itself to him. These two Palpatines are the same person, but the myth only holds one of them, because the other one is too uncomfortable. The other one requires you to ask questions about how a democracy dismantles itself, about what people are willing to give away when they are afraid enough, about how much of what happened was done to the Republic, and how much of it the Republic did to itself. These are not questions the myth has room for. These are questions for after the myth has done its work, maybe long after. No, the Bane holocron, 52 BB. The anomaly in the vault records. We have been here before, briefly. We go deeper now. The monitoring note says, Gatekeeper spoke. 11 minutes. A diplomatic visit from a young senator from Naboo logged in the temple visitor records on the same date. No record of vault access. No official explanation for the activation. The archivist who investigated found nothing unusual. Filed a report attributing it to system error. Closed the case. The senator from Naboo was 23 years old. He had been in the Senate for 1 year. He had a reputation for careful intelligence and unusual political instincts for someone his age. He had a mentor, an older senator named Higo Damask, known publicly as a financial expert, a man of significant but quiet influence, a man whose background, if you tried to trace it fully, became difficult to follow past a certain point. We do not name Higo Damask's other name here. The archive knows it. What we can say is this. The young senator visited the Jedi temple. On that visit, a Sith holocron that had not fully responded to any access attempt in 800 years activated for 11 minutes. The gatekeeper spoke. 11 minutes is enough time for a conversation, for an exchange, for a question and an answer, or several questions, or the beginning of an understanding. We do not know what was said. We hold this honestly. We do not fill the gap with speculation. We simply note that after this visit, after those 11 minutes, the senator from Naboo continued his career, quietly, patiently, with a long view that his colleagues often remarked upon, the ability to see 30 years ahead in any political situation, to position for outcomes that would not materialize for decades, as if he had been given something, or confirmed in something, or simply recognized in something, the way the native Sith and the Dark Jedi recognized each other on Korriban, without a clean word for what they saw. Palpatine was the only Sith in the entire history of the Rule of Two who understood the rule well enough to intend to end it. This is one of the most important things about him, and one of the things the myth misses entirely. The myth presents him as the rule's culmination, the final and most powerful product of 1,000 years of Sith refinement. This is partly true, but it is not the full truth. Palpatine did not intend to be the rule's culmination. He intended to be its termination. Bane designed the rule to produce a perfect Sith through generations of escalating pressure. Master against apprentice. Each generation stronger than the last. An upward line. Palpatine looked at this design and understood something Bane had not built in. The upward line had a problem. If the apprentice was always supposed to eventually exceed the master, then the master was always temporary, always a step, never the destination. Bane had designed a system in which no single Sith could ever be permanent. The rule required your replacement, required your death at the hands of something you had built to surpass you. Palpatine did not want to be replaced. He wanted to be permanent. And so, his plan, the full plan, the one that required the Clone Wars, and the fall of the Jedi, and the creation of the Empire, and everything that followed, was not to complete the rule of two. It was to make himself the last point on the upward line, to be the Sith who ended the Sith by becoming the only one, by living forever. Through Sith techniques that the rule of two had never been designed to accommodate, he almost succeeded. He came very close, closer than anyone in the galaxy understood at the time. And then a man in black armor carried him to a reactor shaft. And the plan ended, not with the grand defeat the myth describes, with a son, with a father, with something the Sith philosophy had spent 25,000 years insisting was weakness. The myth cannot hold this either. The myth needs the defeat to be the Jedi winning, light overcoming darkness, the trained warrior prevailing. The myth cannot easily accommodate the version where the Emperor was defeated by something that had nothing to do with training or power or any of the things the Sith and Jedi both agreed mattered. The myth cannot say he was defeated by the thing he spent his entire life treating as irrelevant, by love, by the very attachment that both the Sith and the Jedi, in their different ways, had both decided to cut away. That version is too strange, too simple, too much like something a child would believe rather than a historian. And so the myth straightens it, makes it cleaner, makes it a victory of light over dark, rather than a victory of something neither side had fully accounted for. The myth is more comfortable. The myth is easier to teach. The myth survives. The real story is also still there, in the archive, in the fragments, in the private accounts and the anomalous vault records, and the removed chapters and the personal notations written by people who sat with difficult things long enough to see them clearly. The real story is not lost. It is simply not the version most people will encounter. Most people will encounter the myth. The myth will do its work. It will provide stability, provide a foundation, provide the story a civilization needs to stand on while it rebuilds. And the myth will be beautiful. It will. There is something genuinely beautiful about the story of light overcoming darkness, about a rebellion that should not have worked, about a son who refused to stop believing in his father. These things happened. They are real. They deserve to be in the story. But they are sitting next to something else. Something the myth cannot quite find room for. The long, patient, silent, paperwork and trade legislation version of the same story. The version that took 1,000 years. The version that never announced itself. The version that was there in the room every time someone made a small decision that seemed ordinary. That version is also true. It is also real. It also happened. It is just harder to make into a story, harder to tell to children, harder to put in a documentary, harder to hold. Both versions are in the archive. The myth is already spreading, already taking the shape it will hold for a generation, already becoming the version that will be taught, already covering the other version the way stone covers what is buried underneath it, not destroying it, just making it harder to reach, requiring more work, more patience, more willingness to sit with something difficult for longer than is comfortable. More of the thing, in other words, that the Sith spent 1,000 years perfecting. They were not foolish. This is the most important thing to understand about the people who made the mistake. They were not foolish. They were not careless. They were not blind. They were tired. They had been fighting for a very long time. Generation after generation of Republic citizens and soldiers and Jedi had given enormous things to the effort of surviving the Sith. Lives, resources, decades. The accumulated weight of a war that had been going on, in one form or another, for longer than most civilizations managed to exist. And then it was over. The Brotherhood of Darkness was gone. The Sith were extinct. The battlefield at Ruusan was quiet. When you have been fighting that long, when the thing you have been afraid of for that long is finally, genuinely, verifiably gone, the relief is not a small thing. It is enormous. It fills the space where the fear used to be. It changes how everything looks, and it changes what decisions seem reasonable. The Ruusan Reformation was announced in 1000 BBY, the same year as the battle. The same year Darth Bane walked away from the wreckage and began building something new. The Reformation was a comprehensive restructuring of the Republic, military, political, administrative. The Republic's standing army was formally disbanded. Defense responsibilities were redistributed to individual member worlds. The Jedi Order was restructured. Its military role was reduced. Its independence from the Senate was increased. The calendar was reset. Time itself was restarted from this moment. Year Zero, the beginning of a new era. An era without the Sith. Every part of this made sense. This is what the historical record shows if you read it without knowing what came next. Every part of the Reformation was a reasonable response to the situation as it was understood at the time. The standing army had been expensive, enormously expensive, a burden on Republic systems that had been carrying it for centuries. Disbanding it freed resources, reduced strain, allowed recovery. The redistribution of defense to member worlds increased local autonomy, which the member worlds had been requesting for decades. The Jedi restructuring clarified a relationship between the Order and the Senate that had been ambiguous and sometimes contentious. The calendar reset was symbolic, but symbols matter. A new calendar said, the old era is over. We are not carrying it forward. We are beginning something new. All of it was reasonable. All of it was well-intentioned. All of it made the Republic more stable, more efficient, and more comfortable in the short term. All of it was exactly what Bane had predicted they would do. He had not planned this specifically. He was not controlling the Republic's decision-making from a distance. He did not have that kind of reach. Not yet. Not for centuries. What he had was something simpler and more reliable than control. He had an understanding of how people behave after a long war ends. He had watched the Republic's patterns across enough cycles to know what relief looked like at the institutional level. What it made people reach for. What decisions it made feel obvious. He had predicted, before Ruusan, that if the Brotherhood was destroyed, if the Sith appeared to be extinct, the Republic would disarm. Not entirely, not recklessly, thoughtfully, carefully, with all the reasonable justifications that reasonable people apply to reasonable decisions. And in doing so, it would remove the primary obstacle to what came next. Not an army, not a defense force, not military capacity. The obstacle Bane was most concerned about was simpler than any of those things. It was vigilance. A republic that believed the Sith were gone would stop looking for them, would stop training its institutions to recognize them, would stop building the kind of structural awareness that might have caught a slow infiltration before it went too deep, would stop asking the question, what if we are wrong? Would stop because stopping felt earned, because they had fought for centuries and they deserved to stop, because the fear was exhausting and the relief was real, and the decision to finally put the weight down was not foolish. It was human. Bane needed them to put the weight down. He needed them to stop looking. He needed 1,000 years of a republic that was not watching for what he was building. And the Reformation gave him exactly that. In one clean, well-intentioned, thoroughly documented, administrative package. Watch what the Reformation produced over the following centuries. Not immediately. The consequences were not immediate. That is the point. That is always the point. Without a standing army, the Republic's ability to respond to threats that emerged from inside its own systems was significantly reduced. Not eliminated. Reduced. The Jedi Order remained. The member worlds maintained their own forces. But the integrated, centrally coordinated military capacity that could have responded to something systemic, something that was not a foreign invasion, but an interior erosion, was gone. And the Reformation increased Jedi independence from the Senate. This seemed like a good thing. The Jedi could not be used as political tools, could not be directed by senators with agendas, could operate with integrity, with genuine service to the Force rather than to any political interest. This was the intention, but independence has a shadow side. An independent institution is also a separate one, an institution without deep roots in the Senate structures, without allies embedded in the political system who might notice when something was wrong, without the kind of daily contact that builds the relationships through which warnings travel. The Jedi became more pure and more isolated, more focused on the Force, and less connected to the ordinary political world where the Sith were doing their actual work. The Reformation made the Jedi exactly what Bane needed them to be. Present enough to seem like a safeguard, separate enough to miss what was happening. This is not the Jedi's fault. We are not saying the Jedi failed. We are saying the structure they were placed in. The structure the Reformation created with the best intentions was a structure that had a specific vulnerability built into it. And Bane knew the vulnerability was there, and planned around it for centuries. Now follow the Reformation forward, not to the next decade, to the next century, and the one after that. 200 BB. The Republic has been without a standing army for 800 years. The idea of a centralized military is now not just absent, it is culturally foreign, something from the old era, something that belongs to the time before the calendar reset. When senators in 200 BBY discuss defense, they are working from an institutional memory that does not include what centralized military capacity actually feels like. They know it abstractly. They do not know it practically. The muscle has atrophied, not through negligence, through 800 years of not needing it. or believing they did not need it, which is not quite the same thing. Still BB. The Republic's confidence in its own stability has become something close to a cultural identity. The Republic endures. This is a phrase that appears in political speeches, in educational texts, in the ordinary language of how the civilization understands itself. The Republic endures. It has survived everything. It is the longest-running democratic institution in galactic history. Its stability is proof of something, of the rightness of its principles, of the strength of its foundations, of the validity of the Ruusan Reformation's vision. This confidence is not wrong. The Republic had survived everything. The Republic was the longest-running democratic institution in galactic history. These things were true. But confidence in your stability makes you slow to recognize instability. Confidence in your foundations makes you slow to examine them. Confidence in your ability to survive everything makes you slow to notice that the thing currently threatening you is not the kind of thing that announces itself, is not the kind of thing that looks like a threat at all, is not the kind of thing that any of your historical experience prepared you to recognize, because it has never been done before. Not this way, not this patiently, not this completely. 32b. The Trade Federation blockades Naboo. This is the moment most historians point to as the beginning of the end. The first visible crack. The first public crisis that would eventually lead to the Clone Wars. And it is the beginning of the visible sequence. But the invisible sequence has been running for 1,000 years already. By 32 BBY, the ground has been prepared. The army is gone. The Jedi are separate. The legal framework for emergency powers is sitting in a document that nobody has had reason to examine carefully. The Senate is an institution that has been slowly, quietly, patiently shaped across centuries. Not controlled, not puppeted, shaped, nudged, influenced in ways so distributed and so gradual that the institution itself has no memory of being shaped. It simply is what it is. And what it is exactly what Palpatine needs it to be. 22 BB. The Clone Wars begin. The Republic discovers it needs an army, and finds, conveniently, that an army has already been grown for it. 100,000 clone units. Ready, trained, waiting. The Senate votes to authorize their use. The vote is not close. What other option is there? Nobody in the Senate chamber asks where the army came from. Not seriously. Not with the kind of sustained, structural suspicion that the question deserved. They ask. There is an answer. The answer is technically accurate. And the war is already starting. And the army is already there. And the Sith are already in the Chancellor's chair. 3 years later, 19 BB. The war is ending. The Separatists are collapsing. The Chancellor stands in the Senate chamber. He has emergency powers. He has had them for 3 years. The Senate gave them willingly, in a crisis, with reasonable justification, with all the careful, well-intentioned logic that reasonable people apply to reasonable decisions. He tells them the war is over. He tells them the Jedi have betrayed the Republic. He tells them a new order is needed, something stable, something that will prevent this from ever happening again, something that will protect the galaxy not just from the Separatists who are finished, but from all enemies, everywhere, forever. He tells them he is creating the Galactic Empire, and he will be its emperor. And the Senate applauds. Stand in that chamber. Listen to the sound. Thousands of senators. elected representatives of thousands of worlds, people who came to Coruscant to serve their constituents, people who believe, most of them, in what the Republic is supposed to be, applauding the end of the thing they were sent to represent. Senator Padme Amidala, one of the few voices who understood what she was hearing, said something in that moment that was recorded by at least 3 different sources. She said, "So this is how liberty dies." With thunderous applause. She was right. She was also describing something that had started 1,000 years before she was born. Something she had no way of knowing the full shape of. Nobody in that room did. Nobody in the galaxy did. The Ruusan Reformation had started the process. The trade dispute in 600 BBY had continued it. The Jedi separation had deepened it. The legal clause in 300 BBY had prepared the mechanism. And 1,000 years of patience, 1,000 years of a civilization not looking at what was inside it, had brought everything to exactly this room, exactly this moment, exactly this sound. The applause was not fear, not entirely. Some of it was genuine relief. The war was over. The chaos was ending. Someone was taking control. Someone competent and calm and reassuring. Someone who had been there through all of it, who had guided them through the crisis, who had earned trust across years of careful, patient relationship building, who felt, to the people in that room, like exactly the right person to hand this to. That feeling was not an accident. It had been built. Across years, across decades, across centuries of quiet preparation that none of the people in that room knew existed. They felt what they were supposed to feel. They made the decision they had been prepared to make. They applauded. The sound travels through the chamber, through the stone, through the structure of a building that had housed a democracy for 1,000 years. The sound is real. The people making it are real. Their relief is real. Their trust is real. And underneath all of it, in the quiet, underneath the applause, is 1,000 years of patience. Finally finished. Finally arrived at the moment it was always moving toward. 1,000 years of small decisions and quiet influences and careful preparation. All of it converging in this room, in this sound, in the faces of people who do not know what they are part of, who will not know for years, some of whom will never know. The Ruusan Reformation declared the Sith extinct, reset the calendar, named a new era, started the clock at 0, and in doing so, gave the Sith exactly what they needed. Not a victory, something better than a victory, a head start. 1,000 years of head start on a galaxy that had stopped looking. We return to Korriban, the way you return to a place that has been in your thoughts for a long time, not with urgency, quietly, the way you return to something you are not finished with, or that is not finished with you. It is Devatanast, ABY. 4 years after Endor. The Emperor has been dead for 4 years. His apprentice has been dead for 4 years. The thing they built together is fragmenting. The galaxy is in the slow, uncomfortable process of becoming something it has not been before. Something it is not sure yet how to name. And Korriban is exactly as it was. The valley is still there. The tombs are still there. The red stone under a pale sky. The carved names weathering slowly on the faces of monuments that were built to last forever. Some of them will. Some of them are already losing their edges. The stone does not mourn this. The stone does not distinguish between lasting and not lasting. It holds what it holds. It has always held what it holds. It will continue. There is no one, in the valley today. No researchers, no expedition, no Jedi, no Sith, just the stone and the wind and the weight of everything that was poured into this place across 7,000 years of deliberate accumulation. The dark side in the rock, still there, not fading, not dissipating, not doing anything the dark side energy is theoretically supposed to do when the practitioners who concentrated it here are gone. It is simply present, the way it has always been present. Pasien, in the same key as everything else the Sith left behind. Stand in the valley for a moment. Just stand. Do not try to analyze it. Do not reach for an explanation. Just feel what the place feels like. The weight, the stillness, the quality of attention that the researchers described, that Dorak Sen described in 990 BBY, that Yela Maru described differently, also in 990 BBY, that every careful visitor to this place has described in their own words, none of those words quite matching anyone else's. The valley resists consensus. It gives each person something slightly different, something shaped to the specific contours of what they brought with them. This may be the most Sith thing about it. The Sith always understood that power is most effective when it is personalized, when it finds the specific shape of what you are already reaching for, and gives you just enough of it to make you stay. We have traveled a long way to get back here, through the oldest records and the most incomplete ones, through the first witnesses who had reasons to shape what they saw, through the stone itself and what it absorbed, through the private accounts of enemies who saw something their official positions could not accommodate, through the slow, invisible accumulation of 1,000 years of patient consequence, through the object that waited in the dark, through the chain of students who carried an idea forward and changed it with each pair of hands it passed through the myth that survived when the reality became too complicated to hold, through the specific misreading that gave the Sith everything they needed and gave it willingly, through the applause. We are back now, at the beginning, or what feels like the beginning, though we know, after everything, that this place is not the beginning of anything. It is somewhere in the middle of a story that may not have an ending we can see from here. The Force still holds things here. This is not metaphor. The Force holds things the way stone holds heat, long after the source of the heat is gone, long after anyone is left to feel it. The stone is still warm. The Force is still full of what was poured into it. Walk through the valley, and you walk through 7,000 years of accumulated presence. Not ghosts, not memories in any clean sense. Presence, the specific quality of being somewhere that has been inhabited by something enormous, something that has left, but has not entirely left. The way a room feels after someone significant has walked out of it. The air rearranged, the weight redistributed. Something different that you cannot point to specifically, only feel. Ajunta Pal is in this stone somewhere. The first Dark Lord. The first exile who looked at a barren world with ancient tombs already cut into it and decided this was the right place to build something. He has been in this stone for 7,000 years. He is not anywhere you could find him. He is not anything you could have a conversation with. But the stone he built into, the stone he had his tomb constructed from, carries something of the choosing he did here. The decision, the first decision, to make this place the center of what the Sith would become. That decision is in the rock, not the man. The weight of the man's choosing, still here. Still part of what the valley feels like. Still part of why it feels like anything at all. There are other presences. Harder to name, harder to locate. The native Sith species who were here before the exiles came, who had their own relationship with the dark side of this world, who were absorbed into what the exiles built, whose name, as a people, does not appear in any Sith record that survived, deliberately removed, perhaps, or simply not considered important enough to preserve. The Sith who built this empire had a habit of treating the things they had absorbed as if those things had never existed independently, as if the absorption was the beginning of the story, as if the story before it did not count. But they are in the stone too, whoever they were, whatever they understood about this world before anyone else arrived to tell them what to understand. Their presence is here. Below the Sith layers, below the Dark Lord monuments, below the Academy ruins, below everything that was built on top of them, in the original stone, in the tombs that were here before memory, carved by hands whose name did not survive. The sound is still there, the low sound from the oldest structure that the researchers documented in 17 ABY. The sound that their instruments could not explain. That acoustic profile that matched neither wind nor settling stone, nor anything in the standard catalogue of explainable sounds. The sound that one researcher described as counting. It is still there today. Low, continuous, coming from somewhere below the oldest floor in the oldest structure, somewhere below what anyone built. Somewhere in what was here before building. If you stand at the entrance to that structure in the early morning, when the wind is low and the valley is at its most quiet, you can hear it, or something like hearing it. The distinction between hearing a sound and feeling a sound in your chest is less clear than it should be in this place. The valley makes that distinction less clear. The valley makes a lot of distinctions less clear. We come now to the object. The last time, the Bane holocron is somewhere in the galaxy. We do not know where. The Jedi temple burned in 19 BBY. The vault records are incomplete. The post-destruction inventory conducted by Imperial archivists was not thorough about everything, was thorough about specific things. The things the new Emperor wanted accounted for. Everything else was catalogued quickly or not at all. The Bane holocron appears in the inventory as status unknown, not destroyed, not recovered, unknown. Unknown is not the same as gone. Unknown means we cannot see it from here. Unknown means it is somewhere in the galaxy, in a case that may still be intact, in a vault that may still be sealed, in the hands of someone who found it and has not made that finding known, or in the rubble of the temple, or in the possession of the Emperor, who visited it once and may have taken it when the taking was easy, or somewhere else entirely, somewhere we have not thought to look. What we can say is this: if the crystal survived, if the gatekeeper is intact, if the object is somewhere in one piece, then it is still cold, it is still patient, it is still holding what Bane put inside it. The argument, the single, careful, philosophically rigorous argument for why 2 Sith in secret are more dangerous than 1,000 in the open. The argument that won. That demonstrated its own thesis across 1,000 years of quiet, invisible, patient consequence. The argument that produced Palpatine, that produced the Senate applause, that produced everything. The argument is still in there, still organized, still waiting for someone patient enough to meet the gatekeeper's threshold, for someone the dark side would recognize as its own, for someone who arrives at the right time, not too early, not with urgency, with patience, with the specific quality of attention the object was built to recognize. Bane has been dead for 1,000 years, but his voice is in there, waiting to speak to whoever is ready to listen. Patient the way everything Bane built was patient. The way the rule of two was patient. The way the 1,000 years of quiet consequence were patient. Patient in the way that outlasts everything that is not patient. In the way that won. And here, we return to the question. The one set down in Chapter 2. On the Ruusan battlefield. In the ash. The one the narrator promised to come back to. The one that has no answer. Did the Sith ever actually believe they would win? Or did they need the war itself more than the victory? We have learned a great deal since we set that question down. We have learned about the first witnesses and their contradictions, about the stone and what it holds, about what the enemies saw that the Sith could not admit, about the patience and the patience and the patience, about what was carried and what was lost, about the myth and what it covered, about the applause and what was underneath it. We have learned all of this, and we return to the question now with all of it. And the question is still open. Consider the evidence. Every Sith who reached their hand toward ultimate power was destroyed by it. Every single one. Exar Kun, who built a Sith empire of genuine power and scope, and then bound his own spirit to a moon in a last act of desperate refusal to accept limitation. The spirit survived. The man did not. The thing he reached for destroyed him before he could hold it. Vitiate, the Sith Emperor of the reconstituted empire, who consumed an entire planet to extend his own life, who spent centuries trying to find a way to feed on the Force itself, who came closer to immortality than almost any Sith in history, and who in the end became something so far from what he had started as that the reaching had consumed the reacher entirely. He survived so long that there was nothing left of the original, just the hunger, just the reaching, with no one left inside it to want anything specific. Revan, who understood the Force more completely than almost any being in history, who looked at both sides, who found something real, who was broken by the looking and rebuilt by the Jedi, and then broken again by the remembering, who spent decades as a prisoner of the Emperor, who finally died in a confrontation that settled something and left other things unsettled in ways that are still unsettled now. Revan reached toward completion. He found only more reaching. Father, who was promised everything, who was told that the dark side could save the person he loved most, who gave everything to the promise, who lost the person anyway, who spent 20 years in armor that was also a tomb, who reached the end of it all and found, in his last moments, not the power he had been promised. A son, a face he could not see with his own eyes until the armor came off, until the reaching stopped. Palpatine, who came the closest, who built the most, who planned for permanence with more skill and patience and intelligence than any Sith before him, who had a plan for living forever, who was thrown into a reactor shaft by the man he had broken and rebuilt and kept beside him as a weapon, by the man's love for his son, by the thing the Sith had spent 25,000 years treating as weakness. Every one of them destroyed by what they reached for. Every single one. And yet, the only Sith who survived were the ones who stayed in the dark, who did not reach openly, who kept the reaching small and careful and invisible, who optimized not for getting the thing but for staying close enough to it to keep reaching. Bane survived, long enough to build the rule, long enough to die on his own terms, because he had learned, from watching the Brotherhood destroy itself, that reaching openly was reaching toward your own ending. Xana survived because she made survival the priority, because she kept the flame small enough that it could not be seen, because she understood that staying alive was the prerequisite for everything else. The middle of the chain survived, generation after generation of Sith who kept themselves invisible, who reached quietly, who accumulated without displaying, who were patient. So what does this mean? Maybe it means Bane was right, that the rule of two was the correct answer, that the Sith who survived were the ones who followed its logic, that the ones who were destroyed were the ones who abandoned patience for the open reach. This interpretation is available. It is internally consistent. But there is another interpretation, one that General Sana's journals point toward, one that Hazen Mall's removed chapter circles, one that the evidence suggests without quite confirming. Maybe the Sith who stayed in the dark survived not because the dark was the correct strategy, but because staying in the dark meant they never had to test whether the thing they were reaching for was actually there. Every Sith who reached the final moment, who got close enough to touch what they had spent their life pursuing, was destroyed by it, not by their enemies, by the reaching itself, by the moment of almost having, by what it felt like when the thing they had oriented their entire existence around was finally within reach, and was not what they had believed it would be, or was not there at all. Or was there but required giving up the last thing they had not yet given, and they could not, or would not, or found that the last thing was the only thing that mattered, and by then it was too late. Maybe the Sith needed the war more than the victory, because the war was the only version of the reaching that did not demand they arrive. The war could go on forever. The war had no moment of truth. No moment where you had to face what was waiting at the end of the path. The war was the path, and as long as the war continued, the path continued. And as long as the path continued, the question of what was at the end of it did not have to be answered. Maybe this is what General Sana recognized in the faces of the Sith she fought. Not evil, fear. The specific fear of someone who has committed everything to a destination they are not certain exists, who cannot stop, who cannot admit uncertainty, who can only push harder toward the thing they are afraid is not there. Because stopping would mean finding out, and finding out would mean everything they had done was done toward nothing. We do not know if this is true. We hold it as a possibility, not a conclusion. The question was set down without an answer. It stays without an answer. This is not a failure of the archaeology. It is an honest acknowledgement of what archaeology can and cannot find. Some things are not in the record. Some things were never recorded because the person who could have recorded them was the only one who knew. And they are gone. And they took it with them. What we can say, what the evidence genuinely supports, is that something in the Sith was never satisfied. Not by winning, not by power, not by the accumulation of everything they accumulated. Something in them kept reaching, past every victory, past every enemy defeated, past every threshold crossed. Something that did not know how to stop, that may not have wanted to stop, that may have understood, at some level below articulation, that stopping was the most dangerous thing. Because stopping was when you found out what was on the other side of all that reaching. The Force still holds this. Whatever it is, whatever the Sith were reaching toward, whatever the question was underneath all the certainty and the violence and the patient, careful, 1,000-year construction of a plan that worked, the Force holds it the way Korriban holds everything. Without resolution, without judgment, with only the weight of what was poured into it. The galaxy is different now, 4 years after Endor. Something has changed. Not completely, not irreversibly. Nothing is irreversible, as this archaeology has tried to make clear. But something. The Jedi are not gone. One of them survived. One of them walked through everything the Sith built and came out the other side. Not unaffected, not unchanged, but present, still here, still connected to the Force in the way the Jedi were always supposed to be connected to it. What he will build from here, what the Order will become, if it becomes anything, is not something this archaeology can see. We are standing in 19 ABY. Looking backward, what is ahead is not our territory. But we can say this: whatever is built next will be built on ground that the Sith prepared. That is simply true. The Republic that the New Republic is rebuilding itself inside of. The Senate chamber, the legal frameworks, the political structures, the cultural habits of a civilization that learned to govern itself in certain ways across certain centuries. All of it was touched. All of it carries something of what was poured into it across 1,000 years of quiet preparation. Not corrupted beyond use, not ruined, but marked. The way the stone on Korriban is marked, by what inhabited it, by what was built into it, by what it absorbed, whether it chose to or not. The new thing being built will have to reckon with this eventually. We'll have to go through the structures carefully, the way an archaeologist goes through a site, looking for what is load-bearing and what is not, looking for what was placed there deliberately and what grew on its own, looking for the old marks underneath the new construction. This is slow work. It requires patience. It requires the willingness to find things you were not looking for, things that change the shape of what you thought you understood. We come now to the final image. In the Valley of the Dark Lords, at the far end, past the great tombs, past the famous names, past the monuments built to last forever, there is a smaller structure, easy to miss. Not because it is hidden, because it does not compete for attention the way the larger tombs do. It does not announce itself. It sits at the edge of the valley with the quiet confidence of something that does not need to perform. The entrance is sealed, has been sealed for a very long time, not by the researchers who came in 17 ABY. They did not seal it. They noted it as already sealed and moved on to structures they could enter, not by any Jedi expedition, not by any Imperial survey team. The door was sealed before any of them arrived, before Ruusan, before the Brotherhood, before the Reformation, sealed in an era whose specific date is not in any surviving record, by hands that are not named anywhere, for reasons that are not documented anywhere. The stone around the entrance is old, older than the stone of the larger tombs. The carving style is different, simpler, closer to the style of the original structures, the ones that were here before the Dark Jedi arrived, before the native Sith were incorporated, before the Empire was built. The entrance might belong to the layer underneath, the layer that predates everything, the layer carved by the species whose name did not survive them. The door is sealed. Nobody knows what is inside. The researchers in 17 ABY ran instruments at the entrance. The readings were outside the expected range, as they were everywhere on Korriban. But at this entrance, more so. Significantly more so. The lead researcher stood at the sealed door for a long time. She did not write about it in the official report. She wrote about it in her personal notation. She wrote, "I did not try to open it." Then she wrote, "I am not sure opening it is the right word for what would be required." Then she left. She went back to the transport. She filed her report. She has not returned. The door is sealed. It has been sealed for longer than the Sith Empire existed, longer than the Republic that defeated it, longer than the calendar that was reset at Ruusan, longer than any of the names carved into the stone of this valley, longer than any of the questions we have been asking. What is inside it has not changed. This is the thing to hold on to. Whatever was placed there, whatever was sealed inside, whatever the original builders of this structure considered worth enclosing in stone and then closing the door on, has not changed simply because no one has opened it in a very long time. Stone does not change what it holds. Time does not dissolve what the stone contains. The sealed door does not mean emptiness. It means the opposite. It means something that has not yet been disturbed, something still intact, something still exactly as it was when the hands that sealed it walked away. We set this down here, carefully, the way Kala Bryn set down the holocron on the Ruusan battlefield, carefully, with the full understanding that we are setting something down rather than finishing with it. These are different things. Setting something down means it can be picked up again, means it will still be there, means the weight of it will wait for whoever comes next. The question waits too. Did the Sith ever actually believe they would win? Or did they need the war itself more than the victory? It is still here, still open, still without an answer that the evidence fully supports. This is not a gap in the archaeology. This is what honest archaeology looks like. Some questions are older than the answers available to us. Some questions may be older than any answers that will ever be available to us. They sit in the record like sealed doors, present, intact, containing something, but not open, not yet, maybe not ever. The wind moves through the valley, the same wind that moves through it every evening. The dust lifts slightly, the kind of dust that has been here long enough to be part of the place. Inhabited dust, carrying the impression of everything that has passed through this air. The dust settles. The valley goes still. The tombs face each other across the red stone. The carved names weather slowly. The dark side sits in the rock, patient. The same patience it was always patient with. The same patience that outlasts everything that is not patient. The same patience that won. The sealed door is at the far end of the valley. It does not move. It does not need to. It is simply there, the way it has always been there. The way everything on Korriban is simply there, holding what it holds, waiting for nothing in particular, or for something very particular, depending on which answer you find more comfortable. We leave it here. We do not open it. We do not try. We stand at the entrance to the valley in the fading light, and we look at the shape of everything that was left behind. The stone, the names, the dark side in the rock, the question without an answer, the door without a key, the silence that is not peaceful. That is not the silence of something finished. That is the silence of something still present, still here, still holding what it was given to hold, still patient, still attentive, still. We set this down. We walk away. The stone remains.